When I was a child, my family often spent the weekends or the holidays at my grandmother's house. As a typical traditional Malay house, the house was made out of wood and was quite huge. Not a surprise, since my father does have a lot of siblings, 9 of them. It wasn't just my immediate family. Most weekends or holidays, even my uncles and aunt would be there too, along with their family. Sometimes there would be around 50 to 70 of us inside that house. It was truly one of my fondest memories, where the entire huge family would sit together to have dinner or celebrate birthdays or whatever. One day, my grandmother fell sick. The doctor simply told us that her health was deteriorating since she was quite old at the time, but that she required no hospitalization. My dad and his siblings all made up their mind that my grandmother should stay with them. Every month, she would stay with a different one of her children at their house. I remember she stayed the most at my house, since it was the biggest at that time. I was happy, since she was a great storyteller and a great cook. In the meantime, my father and uncles hired a nearby neighbor to take care of and clean my grandmother's house every once in a while. Unfortunately, her health continued to decline. She told my father that she wanted to stay in her old home. At first, we didn't like the idea with her being alone in that house, especially with her declining health. After much discussion, my eldest uncle decided to build a house directly in front of my grandmother's house for him to stay in. In the meantime, they would rent a nearby house so that he or my cousins could visit her every day. My father and his siblings also agreed to hire a nanny for my grandmother so that she would never be alone. Fortunately, despite no one having been staying in the house for about 2 years, it was relatively clean. It had been almost a week since my grandmother returned to her own home. The weekend was coming, and my father decided to bring back the tradition of staying at my grandmother's. That Friday night, around 2 of us were there, and that night strange things began to happen. The first to notice that something was off were my cousins. They were all the daughters of Dad's youngest sibling. They were always cheerful, but at that time I remember their faces almost always looking terrified. I chalked it up to them just being kids, which was ironic since I was only around 10 myself at that time. Then, as I walked past their bedroom, I heard through the thin wall that the girls complained to their parents that they had noticed a few shadowy figures, which had been all over the house. My uncle tried to convince them that it was just their imagination. I decided not to care much. I was too tired and sleepy. That night, while I was sleeping, I remember waking up and staring above and seeing something terrifying. Just so you know, a traditional Malay house rarely has a ceiling. The house beam was exposed, and you can see the inside layer of the roof. During my sudden awakening, I saw something like a shadow sitting on the house beam. I had to rub my eyes to see, and after a while I began to make out what it was. It was some sort of creature or something. Am I still dreaming? I thought to myself. I was utterly terrified. I could see the creature, but it was like my brain failed to see exactly how it looked. Sometimes it would look like a lion, then a crocodile, then a huge bird or some other kind of animal. And then it looked at me. All I could remember was its huge red eyes and a wide grin filled with fangs. I tried to scream, but my voice stuck at my throat, and my body felt stiff, as if I were paralyzed. All I could do was slowly pull up the blanket and hide my body underneath it, and force myself to go back to sleep, hoping that it was a nightmare. The next day, as I sat alone at the stairs, trying to get rid of the memories of what happened, from the corner of my eyes I could sense that someone or something had been peeking out from the toilet area looking at the living room. It appeared to be a child, or was the size of a child, with pale, gray skin. Another time I was sitting in a chair in the living room. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it happened throughout the day and the night. That same child. Then I heard my aunts talking with each other. It turns out that I wasn't the only one who had noticed it. The entire family had seen it too. Or rather, we could only see it through the corner of our eyes. When we all turned to look at it directly, it disappeared. Some decided to check it out themselves, and yet, nothing would ever be there. My uncle quietly told us that when a house was abandoned, there will always be something that will live there. That house had been abandoned for 2 years before, so obviously something had moved in, and we were all simply intruders. He told us that if we didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother us. That night we all prayed together, as well as recited some holy prayers. Yet I could still see the little stalker, and I could begin to notice a few shadows around the house that did not belong to the furniture or to the other people living there. Worse for me was at night. I woke up again, and this time the thing was already grinning at me with what I assumed a hand or finger poking at my cheek. It didn't feel solid at all. It felt more like a cloud of smoke. Again, I tried to scream, but my body felt stiff. Like before, I could only slowly pull my blanket to cover my head and force myself back to sleep. I never dare to sleep at that house ever again. Anytime we ever went back to my grandmother's house, during either weekends or holidays, I simply stayed at my uncle's house that was right in front of it. Yet every time I entered there, I could still sense the small figure poking its head out from the bathroom wall and the shadows that would be moving around. My grandmother passed away around 8 years ago, and since then we never have had reason to stay at that house. Now, the house was downsized while I was at university, yet it still has the original layout of the lower area. They only actually got rid of the upper area. I asked my father why not simply demolish the entire building. He then told me that even getting rid of the upper area was difficult. Workers were pushed by nothing, and electronics and engines would always malfunction. In the end, they decided not to touch the bottom area and just continue to use it as storage. I'm a logical person, and I do consider myself a skeptic, even though I know what I saw, and I know that it really happened. Maybe it's just that I tend to be skeptical about most things. I will, as briefly as I can, describe a little history of the house and the changes my family made to it, because I believe that it applies to what I experienced. I'm originally from a small farming town in Washington State. My parents bought a ranch-style house in this town in the early 1980s, and we lived there until early 1993. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and was known as a party house in the 1970s when my parents were in high school. My parents did a lot of work on the house, as it was a little run down when they bought it. There were many holes punched in the walls and doors. The original hardwood floors were in rough shape, and the family room and original master bedroom had disgusting, torn, brown and lime green shag carpeting. The original master bedroom also had wood paneling on the walls. We tore out all the paneling and replaced the horrifying shag carpets with vinyl and new carpeting and renovated the bathrooms. The main change that my parents did to the house was they added a new master bedroom to the back of the house and converted the old master bedroom to a large laundry room / sewing and crafts room for my mom. The new master bedroom was added onto the other side of the master bedroom from the original master bedroom turned laundry room. I include all of this because during college, I mentioned what happened in this house to a friend of mine who was really into the paranormal, and he suggested that the renovations my parents did, in combination with it being a former party house where there had been drug use and possibly violence, had stirred something up. So one side of the house was set up as follows, from front to back. Family room, the new laundry room, the master bathroom, then the new master bedroom at the back. The kitchen was to the right of the family room if you were facing the door to the laundry room, and could be partially seen from the family room. Now, to my experiences. The Void Man. I do not know how old I was when I first saw it, or how old I was when I last saw it. I lived in the house until just before my 8th birthday. I was between 5 and 7. That much I do know. I mostly saw it when I was in the family room. It would stand perfectly still in the doorway from the family room to the laundry room. It seemed to be staring at me, but it had no eyes. It was a pitch-black void in the shape of a human. There were no discernible facial or other body features on it. It was a body with a head on top. The outline of the body appeared to be slightly fuzzy or misty. I would say it was over 6 feet tall. I should also mention that no one who lived in the house was that tall. My mom was maybe 5'3", my dad is 5'7", and my brother was a toddler at this time, so it couldn't be me misremembering any of them. I would just stand there and stare back at it. I felt frozen and didn't know what to do or say. I felt like I couldn't speak if I wanted to when it was there. I remember feeling a sinking sensation when I saw it. I have one distinct memory of staring at it in the doorway to the laundry room, and I could see my mom working in the kitchen. She was standing at the stove and could have seen it if she had turned her head to her right. She did not notice it. I named it the Void Man at some point. Staring at it was like staring into a deep void, a void that would swallow me up. I don't remember feeling fear exactly when I saw the full shadow person. It was more that I couldn't feel anything. That was not the case for the other way that I would see it. It would like to peek its head around the door frames at me. It would do it several times in rapid succession. That would terrify me. I think that was its intention. I would usually go running off to my room or to go find my mom. I only ever saw the full body of the Void Man from the family room looking into the laundry room, but it would peek its head out at me from both of the laundry room doors. The one leading into the family room and the one leading into the master bathroom. If my parents ever saw anything, they had never mentioned it, and I have never mentioned it to them. I'm sure that there are those out there that will say, well, you were very young, you must be remembering wrong, or you made it up at some point and then it became real to you over time. I wish this was the case. I really do. But I remember the Void Man very vividly. I know that I saw this thing, whatever it was. We moved out of that house in 1993 and moved into one that we had built. I have never seen anything like what I did in that house ever again, but the experience has followed me my entire life. I have a nervousness about open doors and what I might see on the other side. My first visit to this hospital was in 2018. After searching for the address for a while, I came across one that looked accurate enough and went on my way to that lost place with a friend of mine. We arrived, astonished by the size of the complex. I didn't do a lot of research before that. I just knew that it used to be a hospital and was built during World War II, and by the address, it seemed legit. On our way down from the parking lot to the lost place, our excitement was growing, but so was our anxiety for reasons that we just couldn't ascertain. We make our way onto the complex at the part where the main entrance was before, and the air felt really dense. My friend felt the same way, but we brushed it off as just being a bit nervous, just ourselves, and we started to walk past some buildings at the entrance, completely focused and being amazed. At some point, my pulse must have slowed down due to me being focused on trying to take in everything I was seeing, because I noticed that it increased in speed when we reached the buildings where I suspected that the patients would have been. It felt like there was strong electricity in the air that made me feel even more uneasy. That's when we heard a door slam behind us at one of the buildings. We, of course, completely froze. The sound came from a building that was pretty far away from us, and that sound was very loud. There was no wind at all that could have caused the heavy doors to slam like that. The trees weren't moving, nor did we hear anything else. Just one door that decided to slam shut on its own. We nervously chuckled and decided to move closer to the exit. I asked my friend if I should record this visit on my phone, and she agreed. We both turned on airplane mode and went on our way. Whether it was due to our anxiety, or us being too alert, or something actually being there, we would turn around or stop walking at the same time, asking the other if we had heard that sound. Sometimes the sounds behind us resembled soft footsteps. Other times we would hear silent whispers that we couldn't quite make out. At some point I began to question my sanity, but I knew that there had to be something there to make such specific noises, loud enough that my friend would also hear them, as I did. As we were walking toward the actual exit, we stopped to look at one building and we heard a very, very loud bang behind us, making our walking become very determined as we made our way to the main street. The bang was accompanied by other sounds that we couldn't define back then. Fast forward and both of us are at my place. We grab individual headphones and start to listen to the recording. And boy, was that some weird stuff. We both enabled plane mode before I hit the record button, but there were so many disturbances in the recording, distinct sounds like someone coughing, whispers, with clear vowels, that we couldn't quite make out the full words to. A woman's voice going, shh, breathing, and bleeps. I have to admit that we were freaking out a lot. I was almost crying because I found it to be so chilling. The thing that baffled us the most was the loud bang that made us leave. I swear to you, it wasn't there. At all. Not the bang on the recording that startled us so much that made us leave the place, but silent sounds? You can hear us being startled and agreeing to leave immediately, but no bang could be heard on that recording, and it's still not there. I held my phone the exact same way that I had been since I started that recording. I didn't put my clothes against one mic. The mics weren't broken after a test recording that we did. So there should be a banging sound, but absolutely there is not. And I have no clue why that is the case. That hospital is a really special place. From later experiences there, I have come to possible conclusions as to what kind of paranormal things occur. I recently had an experience that I'm just not sure about. I tried explaining it to my sister, and I can't even begin to put into words everything that happened and how I felt. So recently I went on a bit of a road trip and visited a bunch of places in the Southwest, Utah and Colorado, Arizona, and Southern California. I stopped at a park in Colorado that I hadn't initially planned on going to, but had never been to, a place well known for its Native American history. It was absolutely beautiful. Honestly, it was amazing and humbling to see the history of the people there. It made me realize that there was so much more about American history than the rather Eurocentric view of colonialism that I was taught. Anyways, like I said, it was amazing. Given that this was November and very off-season, half the park was inaccessible and attendance was minimal. There were other people, but overall it was very quiet. I had been viewing some building ruins atop the mesa, one huge multi-room building, and not that far away another large building with a very large kiva in the middle, and on the southern side of the building, number 2, was a solstice carving on the wall. I was walking around the smaller solstice building, as there was a couple walking around the large building, and I enjoyed the quietness of being alone. And when I went to the large building, they went to the solstice building, and then they left and I was going back to the solstice building to get some more pics of the solstice marker. I was now alone. It's hard to describe exactly what I felt and how everything went down, but I'll try. It was a pretty nice day, temperature in the upper mid-50s. I'm from the Midwest, so that's still shorts weather to me. Some light, small clouds, but not many, pleasant breeze, and a few birds chirping away, and more than a few chipmunks all over the place. As I walked around the Solstice building, everything just became still. Like the wind stopped, the animals went silent and disappeared. It was just weird. There was a large, darkish cloud that came kind of out of nowhere and just hung there. There was a weird heaviness all over. And then there was this smell like what I thought was just a dead animal. Like that sickly sweet smell of rotting meat. I assumed that there was just a dead deer or rabbit or something nearby that the wind had been blowing the smell away, but the wind was gone and everything was just still and heavy. As I reached the solstice marker wall, I noticed that on top of the wall, mind you, the walls are only 2 foot high or so, there was a piece of pottery. I swear that this pottery had not been there before, and it wasn't there in any of my first set of pictures looking back. It was a large, broken piece, but now that I think back, it was really clean. The blacks and the whites were incredibly clear. I went and picked it up to get a closer look, and it was really beautiful. A kind of stair pattern and then an angled set of lines. It was really pretty, but it felt off, oddly heavy for its size. I wanted to keep it, and I wanted to take it, and just kept staring at it for what felt like, God, it's so hard to describe how I felt, but the time stood still, and all I wanted was this pottery. Even now, thinking about it, I still get this weird, longing for it. As I held it, everything was just silent and heavy, and that smell was just so strong. But suddenly, there was this huge raven out of nowhere. Legit, it was on the wall 5 feet away from me, and it was the largest bird that I had ever seen in the wild. This huge raven just cawed and flapped its wings, and I kind of snapped back to reality. Honestly, it was bigger than a friggin' condor. Its body was easily 3 foot tall, and its wingspan was just massive. I put the pottery piece down on the wall, back where I picked it up from, and just looked at this bird, and the bird just looked back at me, and I turned and walked away. Just like that, the dark clouds blew off, and the wind returned, and there were other birds chirping, and the smell disappeared. Actually, the smell all but vanished when the giant raven appeared. I got about 10 feet away from where I had been standing, just around the corner of the Solstice ruins, and I turned around to see the raven, and it was gone. I didn't hear it flap its wings to fly away, and I didn't see anything in the sky, not even a shadow on the ground. It was just gone, and so was the piece of pottery. It was no longer on the wall. I went back to my car and headed back to the visitor center, as besides being totally weirded out over what had happened, it was getting late in the day and I had a fair bit of driving to do to get to my next stop down in Arizona. I had a good 35 minutes drive back to the park entrance to reflect on what had happened and how strange I had felt. Honestly, I felt like I had downed a bunch of Benadryl. I was so foggy until the raven showed up. Even now, I just really can't explain everything that I felt. When I got to the visitor center, I was the only person in the visitor center proper besides the employees, and one guy was just leaving as I entered. In the gift shop, I was getting a mug. I get a mug from each park I visit, and was talking to the park ranger and the cashier, who was an older American Indian woman, about how awesome that the park was, and how I wished that I had learned more about these cultures in school, etc. when I told them about the piece of pottery. I also said something like, "Oh yeah, up at the far view sites, there's a dead animal too. When the wind dies down, you can smell it." And the park ranger and the cashier quickly looked at each other, and then back to me. The cashier asked me if the smell had come before the piece of pottery, and I said yeah, that the wind had stopped and that the animals were all quiet, and I basically told them everything I said above, minus the intense urge to steal the piece of pottery, and they just looked at each other a few times and kept quiet, except when I told them about this huge raven and how it appeared. The cashier let out a gasp. When I finished my story, they had a few questions about the timing of things, how long everything lasted, and in what order everything had happened, and they asked me to describe the pottery and stuff, and all of a sudden the cashier said, "Would you like some tea?" I love tea and was like, yeah, actually that sounds wonderful, thank you. And she went and got some. The ranger and I walked back towards the employee break room down the hall past the artifact restoration exhibit, and she asked where I was and what I knew about the area. And I told her about how truly minimal my knowledge was about the native cultures, even those closer to my Midwestern home. When the cashier returned, she handed me a cup of sage tea, and she asked if I was honest about what had happened. I was really confused, and said yeah, and she told me to drink. The tea kind of tasted like a no-salt vegetable stock. I wished then that I had had some honey and lemon. Then they told me about what they think that I had been near. Apparently they hear a few different stories concerning skinwalker activity throughout the year, but none where someone sees the raven, and that's why they're telling me this. The cashier proceeded to tell me a bit about skinwalkers and how sometimes they curse objects to lure unsuspecting people in. She also said that the fact that the raven had appeared and removed whatever enchantments that I felt was very important, that someone greater than us was watching out for me at that moment, because even though skinwalkers can choose many different animal forms, they would never appear as a raven due to the spiritual importance of these birds. She said that if the raven appeared to me, they could share certain information with me that they would never share with anyone. She told me that the sage would help cleanse me of any remnants of the skinwalker's tricks, and suggested that I see a shaman. I had already finished the cup of tea and was getting a little freaked out, but oddly felt more calm after hearing her speak, and I thanked them and left. I tried not to run to my car, but walked very quickly and got out of there. That night, and a night or two later, I had some very vivid dreams, but I can't remember anything of them, which is odd. I usually remember my dreams when I wake up, at least long enough to write them down. But these dreams, even though they woke me up, I couldn't recall them. I don't really know what happened, or if they were just pulling my leg, but once I got home and really started looking into these things, I kind of feel... I don't know. I feel like I'm crazy, because I can't rationalize what happened. Even when writing this, I realize how insane it all sounds, and I still can't even fully describe it. How weird everything got. It's just hard to put it into words. When I was about 12, I'm now 23, I lived in a relatively large, run-down house. I don't know much about its history, but I do know that it was built in 1936, based off of a newspaper that my family found in one of the walls during a renovation. I believe it had about 17 separate rooms, a fact that I was obsessed with when I first moved in. I just liked counting things. These rooms included 2 basements. One was right near the garage with an old door that went down to a concrete cellar where you could access some of the ducts to the house. And there was one within the house that held the laundry room and a storage room. My bedroom and the bedroom adjacent to mine both had crawl spaces going into the walls, 2 of which I covered with dressers. The house often gave me a sense of unease because of the sounds that it made due to it being old, combined with the fact that we couldn't afford heating it all winter, so there were blankets and plastic wrap in all of the windows, constantly making it very dark. Being alone in it was just scary for some reason. I could never shake the feeling of something looking over my shoulder when I was there alone, especially causing me to act like a fool and yell out at nothing while home alone sometimes. Honestly, I'm not sure what caused that, but I'm sure that it had to do with the level of darkness within the house, due to there being no natural lighting and my tiny adolescent brain conjuring up demons just because the house had been settling or something of that sort. One day, I was heading downstairs to do the laundry, and after I was done switching everything over and grabbing the laundry basket, my attention got caught by a large tank of some sort on one of the outer walls of the laundry room. I'm not sure what it held. It wasn't a water heater, but it may have been some sort of reservoir back in the day. It was very, very dusty, since no one ever went near it or touched it at all. Covering the tank this time were dozens of handprints, small to large, and also ones with much longer fingers than a normal hand. I'm not sure if it was due to dragging down or the hands were just like that. It sent me into fight or flight immediately. I sprinted up the stairs and stayed up there for the rest of the day. It really bothered me trying to think of what could have caused the unnatural-looking, long-fingered handprints. I scared myself a lot thinking about it. Recently, I moved into a new apartment, and in the garage there are a few black handprints that I don't remember being there when we moved in. This could just be because I never noticed them, but I swear they were never there, and one day recently, they had just appeared. It brought back my memory of my old house and the fingerprints in the dust, hence my post here. It makes me a little uneasy, but not much else can be done about it, I'm sure. This event has stayed with me through the years, and I thought I would share it to see what others outside of my perspective think. I'm not really sure, though I have had many more experiences to do with that house in the following years of my life. Before we begin, you must understand that everything you are about to read is absolutely true, and the events continue to this day. It was last summer. My girlfriend, now wife, and I finally made the big decision to move in together. Cobblestone Square is a situation of apartment complexes surrounding a central park. After living in another apartment for 2 years, I learned that a bigger apartment was opening up on the other side of the complex. We needed more space because my wife had 2 children from a previous marriage. After a rushed inspection, we were happy to move in right at the start of June. The months passed by and the days grew shorter and colder. Autumn was drawing to a close, and with it, that's when the trouble began. In all the stories and movies, it starts out small. Things moving from place to place, lights being left on, etc., all chalked up to forgetfulness. This was true in our case, and we didn't think much of it. It only started to escalate with the children. Our apartment is set up with 2 bedrooms and bathrooms on opposite ends from each other. In our bedroom, we have our own private bathroom, and next to the kids' room is a small hallway leading to their own bathroom. We would give them baths in there and potty train, and almost as if flicking a switch, when the autumn months came, our youngest, a 2-year-old girl, would absolutely hate going in that bathroom. At the mere mention of bath time, she would go into hysterics, or on good days, she would sit in the tub, and in the process of bathing, she would look past myself or my wife and start screaming and crying. Oftentimes something would catch her eye in the mirror, and she would also start crying like mad. The most unsettling part would be that as soon as we took her out of the bathroom, she would stop and act as if nothing had happened. Our son, who was 4 at the time, would also run up to us and say that he would hear a voice saying, "Uppy," which was a common saying among the children when they wanted to be held. We asked if it was his sister, and he would profusely say that it wasn't, but he said it sounded like a kid. This happened a few times. With my wife being separated from her first husband and splitting custody, we would have the children come live with us every other week. On the weeks that the kids would go stay with their dad, the activity would seem to die down, but that didn't mean that it wouldn't happen at all. I asked my wife what she remembered from last year, and she recounted a time when we didn't have the children and she was cleaning the house. She noticed the kids' door was open. We usually keep it closed, but she thought maybe I had went into their room for something. She checked to see if I was inside, and seeing that I wasn't, she closed the door and didn't really think anything of it. It wasn't until a while later that she went to use the kids' bathroom and saw that the door was open again. She found me in our room and asked if I had opened it, and I said that I hadn't. With more incidents of lights being found on and doors opening, it all came to a head near the end of October when I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Above the sink, facing the living room, is a small window that allows someone in the kitchen to look out into the dining room and the living room, and additionally the back door, which is a sliding glass door. Important detail. After the kids had been put to bed and were asleep, my wife and I went about our normal duties and chores, trying to finish up before the next day started. As I was washing dishes, I looked up from the sink and saw in the glass of the sliding glass door the reflection of a large shadow in the hallway to the kids' bedroom. It quickly entered the bathroom, and I immediately walked over, turning on the light, and seeing nothing there. I went to my bedroom where my wife was vacuuming, and I asked her if she by chance went into the kids' bathroom for whatever reason. I wasn't surprised by her response when she said no, and I told her what I had seen. It was after this event, and subsequently Halloween, that all the activity seemed to stop. More months passed by again, and we jumped to 2020. August. As soon as the activity started again, I began to keep a journal of all the findings. That way there was a record. On August 10th, I went to the bathroom, the kids' bathroom, before going to bed, and heard a small child giggle. Both children were fast asleep. On August 11th, my wife was bathing our daughter, and for the first time in a year, our little girl started to shriek in fear until she was out of the bathroom. On August 13th, while getting ready for bed, our son knocked on our door. I'm always the one to answer, and he told me that he was afraid. He wouldn't elaborate on why, but when I laid him down in his bed, he begged for the closet to be closed. The closet has never been a problem, and a few nights after this we returned to it being opened and haven't experienced anything like it again. On August 15th, my wife and I had an argument, and I went out to the couch to sleep for the night. As I was tossing and turning, I heard a child's voice in the night say, "Uh-huh," as if answering a question. I didn't react, and forced myself to go back to sleep. Both myself and my wife have caught our son speaking to himself as well. My wife told me that once she heard him saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me." And when she went to go check on him, he was in the hallway by the kids' bathroom, holding his arm. During the daytime, the kids were playing and both me and my wife were doing our own thing. As I was sitting on the couch, our son runs behind the couch and stops and then says, "And how would you do that?" out of the blue. I turn to him and ask him who he's talking to, and after a moment's hesitation, he says, "Nobody." I told him I heard him say something, and he then insisted that he didn't say anything. On one occasion, my wife was sleeping on the couch, and in the middle of the night heard a man's whisper say, "Don't get up," to which she promptly obeyed. It was the night after that I woke up from my sleep in bed to see a shadow shape standing over me with piercing red eyes. I felt as if it was going to hurt me. My wife and I have naturally begun our interest in the spiritual world. We began researching and looking for ways to go about this. We've purchased a Ouija board with no results, and from a medium, a supposedly haunted ring. If our apartment was going to be haunted, we wanted to know by who and with what intention. It seems as if our mail-order ghost has already made their home, as one morning our front door was unlocked and slightly ajar, with nothing stolen. Tonight, as I write this, my wife and I were watching TV on the couch and decided to call it an evening. But as we got to our bedroom, I noticed a low scratching sound coming from the record player. I opened it up and saw that the turntable was moving as the needle was off its holder, turning the record player on. I replaced the needle and tried knocking the player a few times to see if it could have been easily bumped or knocked off, but no. The only way to move that needle was to pick it up with your fingers and set it down. I was reminded of one other time that this happened, long before we bought any haunted items. I am thoroughly convinced that my apartment is haunted. People die on them way too often to think it's not a possibility, and if nobody died here, the cemetery across the road definitely doesn't bring me any comfort. I can say that two distinct entities can be somewhat accounted for: a small child ghost and something else. Or maybe something that wants to be viewed as a child. But let's think happy thoughts. We still live here to this day. Autumn is just beginning, and that's when things really seem to get interesting.
Rock Island is a state park located on Lake Michigan at the tip of Door County, Wisconsin. It's a difficult place to get to. You have to take a car ferry from Ellison Bay to Washington Island, drive across to Jackson Harbor, then take a pedestrian-only ferry from there to Rock Island. No vehicles or bikes are allowed there. Though the island is relatively small, about 975 acres, it has a rather interesting history. In the early 1600s, it was inhabited by a tribe of Native Americans, as well as a small fishing village of European settlers. The two groups didn't trust each other and did have a few bad encounters that nearly led to violence, but for the most part, they coexisted peacefully. By the 1640s, the Native Americans had migrated to other parts of Wisconsin. Shortly after their departure, some settlers reported seeing a new group of people on the island. They appeared to be more white settlers. However, they wore strange clothes and kept to themselves. No one from the fishing village was ever able to speak with one of these new settlers, or even find where they were living. It was around that time that strange things began to happen. Livestock, it's not mentioned which animals, were found slaughtered in the village. Blood was found marking some of the buildings in the village. On a different night, a building used for meat preservation burned to the ground. The villagers felt that these actions must have been taken by these new people. They intended to find them. After a thorough search of the entire island, though, including the wooded inland area, not a single person was found. The strange occurrences seemed to stop soon after the search, and none of the settlers were ever seen again. In 1836, a lighthouse was built on the northern part of the island. After construction was finished, it was inspected, and the report read, "The material of which the lighthouse and dwelling are made are of the best quality, and the work was done in a substantive and workmanlike manner." David E. Corbin was appointed the first keeper of the light on December 19, 1837. Only 3 years later, in 1840, despite the apparent quality of the construction of the lighthouse, Corbin began complaining of plaster falling from the building and that some sort of liquid would ooze through cracks, leaving the house constantly damp. Corbin was totally alone most of the time in the lighthouse. Some said that when visiting him he would stare at a certain wall, and sometimes spoke vaguely of the other visitors. In 1845, after 8 years of relative solitude at the lighthouse, an inspector visited the lighthouse keeper and determined that while Corbin was fulfilling his duties, he was behaving strangely. The official report says that the inspector ordered Corbin to take a 25-day leave of absence to find a new wife to live with him at the lighthouse. However, some think that the inspector was startled by Corbin's mental state after the years of isolation and thought it would be best that he spend some time away from the island. In 1852, Corbin reportedly fell ill and died that December in the lighthouse. He was buried in a small cemetery just south of the structure. The next lighthouse keeper also reported the surprisingly quick deterioration of the lighthouse. Some friends, having visited the new keeper at his dwelling, said that he would talk of seeing things in the house at night, but would not elaborate on what it was that he had seen. In 1858, after only 22 years of service, the original lighthouse was torn down and a new one was built. From that point on, the lighthouse keepers were required to have an assistant keeper or family member stay with them. No odd events were further reported in the lighthouse logbook outside of strong storms and occasional shipwrecks, with the exception of January 20th, 1876. The keeper at the time, named Betts, reported that he saw two men attempting to row to the mainland from Washington Island. He wrote that a terrible storm came up shortly after their departure, and that they had never made it to their destination. Over 3 months later, on May 3rd, 1876, Betts wrote, "The two men who were lost last January have been seen several times. Once from Caney Lighthouse, and once from Jacksonport. The men were apparently frozen stiff and sitting upright in the boat among a mass of ice. At last account, they were still adrift. There is not much hope that they will be found and buried." By 1900, most of the island's inhabitants left for better fishing areas. In 1910, a successful business owner and investor named Chester Thorderson purchased all of the island, with the exception of the land occupied by the lighthouse. He used the island as a private summer retreat from his business in Chicago. Thorderson is responsible for the unique and mystifying buildings and structures that remain on the island today. On the south end of the island, he built a giant stone hall containing a boathouse on the lower level. A stone water tower was constructed on the east side of the island, and an imposing wooden gate was erected to the west. The Great Hall was used as a library to store Thorderson's immense book collection. He owned over 11,000 books, and it's rumored that his collection included some very rare volumes on the occult. Thorderson died of heart failure on January 6, 1945, and some have speculated that he actually saw something which scared him to death. The history I've provided here has been to give context for the experiences that I myself have had, directly or indirectly, on Rock Island. In August of 2021, I took my first and last trip there. After taking the 2 ferry rides, I arrived at around 2 p.m. I had booked the remote campsite E, which is a backpacking site that's a little over a mile from the dock. I took my time enjoying the scenery on the hike to the camp's location, taking a couple of breaks also due to the weight of my pack. I was definitely packed more than necessary for camping. I got to the site and set up my tent, got everything situated. I then began gathering sticks and driftwood from the beach to start a fire. On my third trip back from the beach, before I got back to my site, I heard a single, high-pitched, squealing sound coming from the forest. It wasn't close, but it was so unusual that I stopped in my tracks, waiting and listening to see if it would happen again. It didn't, so I continued my trek back. When I returned, I started working on getting the fire going. The remote camping sites on Rock Island are pretty well spaced out. Sites C, D, and E are grouped together, but there's probably 100 yards between each one. There's no real trail connecting the 3 sites directly, but enough people have walked along the ridge between them to have made an obvious path. As I was setting up sticks in my fire ring, something caught my eye, and I looked up. A fair distance away, it could have been at Site D or a bit further, there was a person running in my direction. My first thought was, well, that's odd, because like I said, it wasn't even really a trail that they were on. Then my mind went to, there must be something wrong, that this person must need my help. They got a little closer, and it looked like maybe it was a woman in loose gray clothes, maybe wearing a hoodie. It was still too far away for me to be able to make out any real details. I quickly rose from the crouching position that I was in, and just as I did, I heard that high-pitched noise again. It was behind me, and it was much closer this time. This startled me quite a bit, so I turned around to look behind me. I scanned the trees for a couple seconds, but didn't see or hear anything. I turned back around, thinking that the running person must be getting close, but now they were gone. Again, I stood there and scanned the trees. They were nowhere to be seen. I was so confused that I stood frozen there for a few moments. It was all very weird, but I was able to reason it out in my head that it must have been a fellow camper from Site C or D who had been running for the pit toilet located a couple hundred yards west of the sites. I tried to forget about it, but it was really bothering me. I did not like whatever that noise was, and I just felt really off about the entire thing. After some effort, I let it go and got my campfire going. I ate a quick meal and drank a few beers, then decided to go for a little walk. I hadn't been to Site C or D yet, so I thought that I would check them out, see if I did have some neighbors camping close by. Site D was empty. I did see the path that led from the site to the main trail and pit toilet, so that made me feel a little less uneasy. I figured it was maybe someone from Site C who took a wrong turn and wound up taking the long way around by going through Site D to get to the main trail. It didn't make a ton of sense, because I probably still should have seen them, but it still made me feel a little bit better. I continued on to Site C and saw that there was a tent set up. I really didn't want to bother anyone, but I thought I would go over with the excuse that I would introduce myself as their camping neighbor and see if anyone looked like they might have been the runner from before. I came up to the site and saw a couple sitting at a picnic table. Neither of them appeared to be the person that I had seen. We went through our social formalities, introducing ourselves to each other. They were probably in their mid-30s, both very nice and both very drunk, but quiet drunk. I didn't ask about the runner or the noises. I thought it might be weird. I wished them a good night and walked back to my tent. When I got there, I smoked a cigar and had a few more drinks. It was getting dark. It started out as a perfect night. The sky was clear, and I just hung out looking up at the millions of stars hovering above. I felt calmer about everything and decided to get some sleep. It had been a long day, so I passed out almost instantly. At nearly 2:30 a.m., I was awoken by a huge boom of thunder. The sky had begun pouring rain. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped. I love camping in the rain, but I do not love camping in a lightning storm. I was beginning to worry. The wind was whipping around my tent, and the ground shook from the thunder and lightning. I didn't feel great about being out there in a tent, so exposed. The storm only lasted for another hour, though, before it turned into a light, steady drizzle, and I was beginning to doze off. Just as I was nearly asleep, though, I heard the squealing noise, yet again. I opened my eyes wide and lay there silent in the dark. Then came another noise, this time much closer. I knew there were no really dangerous animals on Rock Island. There are deer, porcupine, but nothing like bear or wolves. Still, knowing that didn't do anything to reassure me. There was just something about that sound that made me incredibly uneasy, even paranoid. I keep calling it a squeal as well because that's the best description that I have for it. It sounded to me like a pig squeal. I honestly don't know that much about pig noises, but that's what I thought of when I heard it. An injured, angry pig squeal. I continued to lay in my tent and started hearing footsteps outside. It was still raining, so the sounds were a little buried in the sound of the rain, but it definitely sounded like a large animal or another human that was walking around. I sat up and took out my knife. In my head, I kept telling myself that it was fine, that there was nothing in those woods that could hurt me. I listened as the footsteps started moving away. Then I just sat there, still holding my knife, for about 10 minutes without hearing anything. I kept internally telling myself that it was just an animal, everything was fine, and that I was being stupid because I just needed to get more sleep. Just as I was about to lay back down, however, there was yet another squeal. This one was very loud and very close, as in right outside my tent. It felt as though my heart just stopped then and there, and a shiver went down my spine. My heart beat so hard that I felt my pulse through my entire body and could hear the blood rushing in my ears. It took everything in me to force the words, "Get out of here," from my mouth. I didn't shout, but tried to be as stern and mean-sounding as I could in the moment. I didn't hear any more footsteps or squeals that night, but I also couldn't sleep. I just laid there in the tent until eventually the rain stopped and the sun rose into the sky. All the time I kept reassuring myself and at the same time telling myself that I had to be being stupid. It had to be just an animal. It was probably 7 a.m. before I decided that I had to get up to relieve myself. As soon as I unzipped the tent flaps and stepped out, I saw that the site's picnic table had been flipped upside down. When I saw this, I was surprisingly calm in my reaction. I simply thought, okay, this is enough, I'm leaving the island today. I checked my surroundings. Nothing else seemed out of place. I eventually reasoned that the wind had blown the table over during the previous night's storm. It still seemed weird, though, because the table was heavy, and I felt like I would have heard it being turned over. I made some cold instant coffee, had a bite to eat. I started feeling better again, so I decided to go for a hike. I must admit, I get pretty easily scared when I'm camping in the woods by myself. Maybe that's natural. After breakfast and getting a bit of sun, I realized that nothing I heard was really anything that couldn't be explained. Other than not getting a good night's sleep, I was having a pretty good time. The reason I came to the island in the first place was to hike the 7-mile Thorderson's Loop Trail. It has a lot of interesting things to see, and I was excited to get going. I packed a few things in my backpack and started off. Fairly close to my site was the water tower. I have no idea how it originally worked, or why it had to be a tower, but it's an impressive building with a fireplace that looked as though it had been used recently. A bit further down the trail was a cemetery. It's known that 2 sisters and a few others are buried there, but it's also believed that there are more unmarked graves. They were likely some of the settlers from the old fishing village. The island has 3 cemeteries. One is by the beach, and that's where Chester Thorderson is buried. One is on the eastern part of the island, where the 2 sisters are buried. And one is on the northern part of the island, where the original lighthouse keeper David E. Corbin is buried. There's also at least one Native American burial ground on the island. However, no one knows exactly where it is. I kept walking until I came to a nice scenic overlook area with a bench where I sat down and drank some water. That's when I heard someone talking on the trail ahead of me, though I couldn't see anyone yet. There was a bend in the trail, and the trees were thick. I sat on the bench waiting for the people to appear. The voices were coming closer, and I could tell that they weren't speaking English, but I couldn't place what language that it might have been. Both voices were very deep, guttural. Then, from deep in the woods, I heard a loud call. Immediately, both of the voices I was listening to responded with a call of their own. I kind of smiled because it sounded like they were mocking whatever had made the sound in the forest. I got off the bench, put my backpack back on, and started walking further down the trail from them. I never actually saw the people, though. The rest of the hike went well. I visited the grave of David E. Corbin. I took a self-guided tour of the lighthouse. I passed by a wooden gate that seemed to have been used as part of a larger structure. Next, I went past the Great Hall and dock area from where I had arrived on the island and visited some of the other structures. Next, I came across the cemetery housing the body of Thordarson himself. And finally, I finished the loop by returning to my campsite. It was a very nice hike, with a lot to see, and it wasn't especially difficult, but still, I was tired. I did go down to Camp C and ask the couple from the night before about how they had fared during the storm, but they had already packed up and left. I was disappointed because I'd also considered asking them whether they had heard the squealing noises. The rest of the evening was uneventful. I built a fire, made a meal, had a cigar and some drinks. As soon as it got dark, I was ready for bed, especially after having had so little sleep the night before. I got inside my tent and quickly faded out of consciousness. I might have been asleep for about 3 hours when I woke up suddenly, instantly alert. Nothing that I was aware of had caused me to wake up, but I felt that something was wrong. I sat up, and this part of what happened is difficult to explain. A feeling of complete dread washed over me. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if something or someone was inside that tent with me, and I could feel its anger, its seething rage, its hatred of me. Something very bad was about to happen, and I couldn't do anything about it. I started to shiver uncontrollably. There was a smell in the air, that of garbage or rotten meat. It was so strong that I wanted to throw up. I couldn't even move, though. I was frozen, and even weirder is that I accepted whatever was about to happen to me. Like my brain was telling me that whatever was about to occur, even if it were death, that it would at least be relief. Then I passed out. At least, I have to assume that I passed out. That's all I remember anyway, until waking up around 8 the next morning. I opened my eyes to discover that I was laying outside my sleeping bag on top of it, and my legs were in an unnatural and uncomfortable position. I was on my back, with my left leg straight out, and my right leg was bent so that my foot was up against my left knee. My heart was pounding, but I kept telling myself that it was a dream, and that I was leaving right then. I packed up very quickly and started off toward the dock to catch the first boat off the island. Since it wouldn't be arriving until 10:30, I had a little time to kill around the Great Hall and dock area. I wanted to get away from that place badly, but I did feel a smidge better just being out of the woods where I could see other people. I sat down on a bench, a little to the east of the dock, and lit a cigar, just giving myself something to do while trying not to think of the night before. I was sitting a few minutes, scanning out over the water, when I was startled by someone saying, "Hi!" I jumped and was embarrassed when the person came around apologizing, saying that they were just wanting to ask whether I had a lighter. I felt like an idiot, and told him that it was fine, that I just hadn't had much sleep. I tossed him my lighter and he lit a cigarette, then gave it back, and we began chit-chatting about the usual things that you would discuss with strangers. Where we were both from, the weather, and so on. It was a nice, normal conversation, and he seemed like a pretty nice guy. Naturally, in the course of our talking, he asked about which campsite that I had stayed at. I told him, and in response he explained that whenever he books a site, he comes to the island and chooses whichever spot that he wants, because the site requires the stay to be booked, but that you can actually camp wherever you want to because it isn't monitored. He told me that he comes to the island a few times a year, and that once he found a small log house in the woods. That his plan was to attempt and find that location again, and camp inside the cabin. After my personal experience with only one time camping on the island under my belt, I kind of wanted to change the subject, to be honest. Then he asked if I had heard the screeching sounds. I knew that he was talking about the squealing. I told him that I had, and asked if he knew what it was. It took a second for him to reply, and when he did, I saw his face change. He had this expression on his face as if he were debating whether or not he should tell me, as if it were some kind of secret. Then, in a calm and matter-of-fact manner, he told me, "A demon lives on this island." Under any other circumstance, I would have laughed him all the way back to the mainland. Not after what I had heard and felt, though. He looked at me and must have sensed my anxiety and fear, because he gave a quick laugh, asking me if I had seen anything at night. I told him that I hadn't, and he stared at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I felt like he could tell that I was lying, that I had, in fact, experienced something. At this point, I was officially ready for the conversation to be over. Then he told me that he had seen something in the cemetery in the dark. His face and mood changed again, like he was now trying to confide in me. I didn't want to ask what had happened, but I knew that he wanted me to, so I did, and when I spoke, my voice came out shaky. I could tell he changed his mind then about sharing with me. He actually looked at me with empathy instead, and told me that it was hard for him to explain. That if I was afraid of the screeching noises, though, that I probably shouldn't go near the cemeteries. I didn't respond right away, and then he said these 4 words completely without context or explanation. "Keepers of the flame." I looked down at my cigar, ashed it, and put it out, and told him that I was going to wait by the dock for the ferry. He nodded, and I started walking away. After a few steps, he called out to me, and I turned to look at him. "Don't come back here," he said. I turned back, continuing to walk away from him. I don't know if his words were a friendly suggestion or a warning, but I took them to heart. I am definitely not going back to Rock Island. When I got home, I looked up Keepers of the Flame as it pertained to Rock Island. I found 3 things the mysterious stranger could have been referring to. The name of the Native American tribe who once lived on the island could be translated to Keepers of the Flame. The lighthouse keepers on the island were also referred to as Keepers of the Flame. And then, there was a 19th century cult said to visit the island from time to time, who called themselves the Keepers of the Flame. I know hundreds of people visit Rock Island every year and have a great time camping, hiking the trails, and exploring the buildings. I can only say that in my humble opinion, if you've never paid the island a visit, stay away.
The house my grandparents owned when I was younger had a lady in the basement. At least, that's what I called her. My older sister called her the lady on the landing, because she only ever saw her on the landing to the basement. Either way, basement. I haven't correlated any of my personal stories with my cousins or siblings except my own. My aunt used to live down there, and I haven't dared to ask her about it because she had an experience when she was younger where she was physically lifted out of the bed by her ankles, and because of that, you can't even mention ghosts or paranormal stuff because she covers her ears and walks away. But that's another story for another day. Anyways, my personal stories. I'll try to keep them short and sweet. The first time I can recall seeing her, I was hanging out with my aunt, a different aunt than the one mentioned above. She and her son were in the house while my mom was working, and my grandparents were in Hawaii. Now, for some reason, she chose to bathe me in the basement bathroom, which was weird because there was another fully functional bathroom with a bathtub on the second floor of the house, as well as the shower in my grandparents' room. My cousin was expecting his friends to come over and play. The doorbell rang, so my aunt ran up to answer it, but had my cousin stay with me. I was about 3 or 4 at the time, he was about 9, just to keep an eye on me. She called him up to go play with his friends, and as soon as he left the bathroom and was halfway up the stairs, the door slammed shut and the lights turned off. Then, all of a sudden, I see this woman literally in the mirror facing me, but it looked like she was getting ready to walk out of it because she was getting closer. I, of course, start screaming. My cousin is on the other side of the door desperately trying to get in. My aunt comes flying down the stairs and couldn't get the door to open either. She kept telling me to unlock it, but I was stuck, frozen in terror. Finally, she gets the door open and sees nothing. She flips the switch on and gets me out of the tub, and nothing else was really said about it. Later that week, I was again with my aunt as my mother was working. I asked if I could sleep in Grandma's bed since they weren't there, and at the time, at my little size, that bed seemed humongous. She called them in Hawaii to ask for their permission, and they said it was fine. So I'm asleep in their bed, and I'm not exactly positive if it was a dream or an actual experience that had taken place. I was in the center of the bed. From there, you could see straight into their bathroom on the right side of the room, and then straight down the hallway into the computer room. Mind you, this is on the 2nd floor now, not the basement. In this maybe dream, the bathroom light flipped on and I could see her again coming out of the mirror. It was like I was locked in place, but I could see down the hall in the computer room my mom sitting at my grandma's computer. I tried to call her, but it came out as a dull whisper. I tried over and over, but the sound just wouldn't come out. The woman actually made it out of the mirror this time, and got just a step out of the bathroom when I was able to get unlocked, and I ran down the hallway into the room where my mother was. Again, I don't think anything was ever actually said about this. Another time, maybe 2 years later, my mom and I were sleeping in the basement bedroom, and the closet doors were those full floor-to-ceiling mirrors. I saw her again, but my mom was within reach, and I woke her up and she saw this woman too, and grabbed me and ran upstairs. I guess a more adequate name for her would be the lady in the mirror, but I've been calling her the lady in the basement for what seems like forever. I know for a fact that the cousin from the first story saw her on a number of occasions. My sister saw her, my brother saw her, and a couple of other cousins when they would visit from out of state. It really only affected us kids. Over the past couple of years, I've asked my mother if she remembers it. My sister, my aunt that would watch me, and then her son and everyone is pretty much on the same page of, this was real. My mother's theory is that she was a family member from the past that just stuck with the family, and she didn't mean to be scary, she just was, because we weren't used to seeing that sort of thing. I asked my grandpa about it last week over text if he recalls me ever saying anything to him about her, and he replied, no, and I'd prefer it if you didn't. Now, here's the kicker. My grandma passed in December of 2018. I had not seen the lady in the basement since that particular house. They moved houses, hell, even moved states, and I never saw her in any of the other houses. Not once. But after my grandma died, I saw her in the house that I was living in that wasn't even close to the original house where I first saw her. Now I'm wondering if my mom's theory on her being a relative that passed and just was attached to us is even true, and that when my grandma passed, she followed her, but made her rounds to say bye? Because right after I saw her at my own house, I called my sister immediately and she freaked out because she had seen her at her house the day before. I haven't seen her since, and I pray I don't see her again. Half of me wants to write a letter to the new owners of that house from my childhood and ask them if they have seen her as well. I was around 12 years old, and me and my friend were in the mountains. I can't recall the name of the village, but it was situated in the Czech Republic. We were on a hike and stumbled upon an old military station or bunker, just left there after World War II. We went home for flashlights and came back just before the sun was out. We went inside and found that it had like 2 or 3 floors underground, maybe more, with a 40-meter well full of frozen water on the ground floor. We decided to go down and explore. First floor, there was nothing unusual, just some empty concrete spaces. We went another floor down, and I saw some things on the ground that looked like dead rats from a distance. I laughed it off and went to take a closer look. They were bats, about 10 of them, just lying down, dead. They weren't like violently smashed or anything. There was no blood. It was as if they were just sleeping, not even rotten or decaying. I poked one with my foot, and the thing just rolled over. I started to get a little scared, but eager to explore further. My friend was basically halfway up the stairs at this point, nervous laughing, saying, "Yeah, we should really go, I have a bad feeling," or something like that. I was almost pulled to continue exploring. Half of me knew that it didn't feel right, but I ignored my friend and continued on. I was almost there, and I suddenly got sick in my gut. That feeling that's screaming in you, the adrenaline. I took another couple of stairs, shining with my flashlight ahead, and then I saw it. I scanned the whole floor, seeing the stairs that went even further below collapsed, so no getting further down, and as I looked across the room with my flashlight, there was a spot that it could not illuminate. In the middle of that spot, there stood the shadow of a man. The flashlight's beam just couldn't get through the form of it. It ate all of the light. I then realized how cold that it had become. I could see my breath. I was staring, paralyzed, for what seems like minutes, but was probably only a couple of seconds. The shadow got a little closer as I blinked. No need to say, I bolted like I never did before, not even caring if it was behind me or what it was. Just running for my life. I got to the entrance and my friend was looking at me horrified, and I just told him to run while rushing past him. We sprinted for about 5 minutes, then confirmed that yes, we were still alive. When we got home, he told me that he had seen something in the corner as I ran past him, so it wasn't just me. His father told us the next day that a lot of soldiers had died there, and there's even an army museum nearby. So was it the ghost of a soldier or a shadow person? When I was a kid, younger than 12, my mom took me to visit her old friends at their apartment. It was decorated in an odd fashion. Tapestries hung all over the place with old antique furniture and knickknacks lining the walls. We didn't visit there long at all. On our way out the door, my mom pointed out a statue that they had in their living room. It had a beard, eyes that looked straight ahead, and a walking stick that connected to the base of the statue. It was about half my height, hand-carved solid dark wood, and was sort of tribal-looking. I remember thinking, I really hope they don't offer to let her have that thing. It's scary. And, of course, they gave it to her. I felt uncomfortable sharing the car ride back home with the statue. My mom was raving about how cool it was all the way there. I couldn't have been less happy. After we made it back, she placed it down next to the fridge in the kitchen, right outside the entryway. That sucked because our kitchen was the center of our house. Anywhere you wanted to go, you usually had to walk through the kitchen. So I told my mom how much I hated the statue, and how I really hated the idea of it being there in particular. My mom told me that I was just being silly, so there it stayed. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the statue being on the other end of the house, and it terrified me. It made me feel unsafe. I don't know what I found to be so threatening about it, but the next day my grandmother agreed with my feelings. She told my mom that the statue made her very uneasy, and that it had a negative energy. My mom told her that she was overreacting, and that she wasn't getting rid of the statue. I felt constant anxiety. I would often refuse to leave my bedroom in the morning after having violent nightmares involving the statue.
It was always something along the lines of the statue becoming animate and stabbing me to death with its walking stick. When I walked through the kitchen, I would literally push my back against the wall and edge around the room to avoid getting near the damn thing. In time, even my mom's friends agreed that it kinda weirded them out too. I hated it, and despite how much it scared people, my mom still wouldn't get rid of it. Though she did finally agree to move it to the living room in a more secluded space. One night I was sitting in the dining room doing my homework, and my mom was in the living room with her friend. I heard whispering that was akin to what you'd hear in a horror movie. Cryptic, overlapping, incoherent whispers. I immediately knew that the voices didn't belong to my mom or her friend, so I went into the living room to ask them if they had heard anything, and before I could speak, the look on their faces told me everything. My mom told me to come closer to her and said, "We heard them too." We all agreed that the sound was unmistakably close to us, and it was clear as day. The source of the sound had come from, you guessed it, around the same spot that the statue had been moved to. We all just sort of stared at the statue for a minute blankly, and I don't remember what else was said after that. But still, my mom refused to get rid of the statue. The nightmares continued. My anxiety grew worse and worse. Bad things constantly happened in the house. My mom got pregnant sometime around then and had to be hospitalized, so I went to live with my grandma for a bit. I told her all about how my mom never got rid of the statue and how I had never felt safe since it arrived. I told her about the nights that I felt someone looming over me, and the times when I locked myself in the bathroom because I heard noise coming from it. After my mom delivered my baby brother, I moved back home. My grandma explained to me that she had burnt the statue long ago, and didn't care how my mom felt about it because I didn't deserve to live in fear over a stupid piece of wood. Once the statue was long gone, my mom finally stopped being stubborn and agreed that strange things had occurred. I was finally able to walk through my house again without tiptoeing around it. But sometimes, I still felt off about the house after that.
I live in the basement of my parents-in-law's house, and my wife never goes down to my room. I'm almost always in there alone. Since I've lived there, a few things have been happening that I dismissed as ventilation or something or other, such as my door slowly creeping open. Frankly, I wouldn't even have noticed something opening if it weren't for the green indicator light of something I have plugged into the wall outside my room. At night, if I have to leave my room, I exit and make an immediate left and dip into the bathroom. I can almost always sense an entity in the living area or bar area of the basement. This feeling is compounded when I exit the bathroom and my reflection appears on the wall of our sliding doors. Sometimes, I do not have a face in my reflection. I quickly re-enter my bedroom and shut and lock the door. Some nights there's a knocking from within my mattress that wakes me up, usually between 3 and 3:15 a.m. I have no way of dealing with this other than risking it and fleeing upstairs to my son's room. My son, 3, has autism and frequently says, "That's scary," over and over in the basement while looking toward the bathroom and living areas. The light switches that I have access to when leaving the room frequently cease to function right when I need them, or will flicker out almost violently as I'm on the staircase halfway up and out of the basement. I can hear rustling in the middle of the night sometimes as well, and I occasionally convince myself that it's just a mouse. Lately, this has graduated to the sound of footsteps in the ceiling in the middle of the night. Most recently, when I heard these footsteps, there was no one home but me, and I searched the house wielding a knife for an intruder to find no one home. I think that this entity is aware that I know it exists, and I interacted with it via the mirror once, and it contorted my face. I come from the county where Ireland's most haunted house, Loftus Hall, is located. If you want to know the history of Loftus Hall and the original story to it, I'm sure you can find it on Google. People that have visited all have their own stories of experiences at the house, and I'm going to share with you some of my experiences that I've had over the years. I lived about a 30 minutes drive away from it, so it was a destination that we visited a lot. I remember the first time I visited the grounds of the house. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old and was visiting it with my uncle. As we drove up the long lane leading the way to the house, I remember looking at all of the windows and getting a shiver as we approached. We parked and got out of the car. I stood and stared at the house. We walked around the grounds and around to the side of it where, at the time, there were apple trees. We picked some of them, as they were red and juicy, and put them in a bag to bring them home with us. When we got home and got the apples out of the bag, every single one had a rotten part on one side. I mean, a big, green, soft, gooey lump on all of them. Another time, when I was around 14, I had went to Loftus Hall with my friend and his mom. There's a nearby lighthouse that's open for people to visit, and we went there first. When we got to the house, there were a few people around, and a young American family there. A mom, dad, and 2 girls, aged around 5 and 9-ish. The 2 girls were running around and playing on the grounds when they ran to their parents laughing, and the 9-year-old said, Mommy, Ann wants to show us something. Can we go to her room?" Now this may seem like normal child behavior, but Anne is the name of the girl in the original haunting story of Loftus Hall. I must also mention that the actual house was not open for guests to go in and out of as they pleased. Not at that time. When I was 16, that was my first time going into the house. We booked a tour on Halloween night. There were some ghost hunters who do an overnight stay every year, and a certain amount of guests can stay there with them for the night. We arrived and went in. We set up our sleeping bags while the ghost hunter crew set up their equipment. We took the tour of the house at night with a tour guide and in groups of 5. We went to each room with the guide giving the story behind it. We got to a room called the Tapestry Room. This is the most famous and apparently most haunted room in the building. It's said that Anne was locked in this room, and she died in the room as she stared out the window waiting for her mysterious stranger to return. You can actually find the details of this story online. She was locked in there and sat with her knees to her chin, and when she died, her body could not be straightened. Anyway, we entered this room and it was freezing. One of the guests in our group, now I don't know if they were paid actors or not, but one of the guests in our group collapsed and went into a fit, arms and legs flailing everywhere. An ambulance was called, and he was sent to the hospital. Apparently, it happens often that people collapse and have seizures once they enter that room. The house is situated on a cliff, and the sea is in the background. About 4 years ago, we went for a drive down there on a foggy evening, and we were looking out to the sea. As we did, we saw the outline of a ship. It looked like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but it floated through the fog and vanished. There have been hundreds of encounters regarding this house that are recorded. Everyone has their own experiences from visiting, everything from feeling queasy in certain parts of the house, to seeing ghosts in the windows, to meeting people while on tours that nobody else who was on the same tour remembers. There's also a hole in the ceiling that goes through the roof, and this is where the devil flew through to escape from the house. Over the centuries, this hole has been repaired multiple times, but each time it is repaired, it will only last for a few days and then reopens again in the same place.
I have had many paranormal experiences throughout my life. I'm a spiritual person and have always been interested in the supernatural. This particular experience took place when I was 13. My mom, dad, sister, and I had to move because of my dad's work. This time, we were bound for Florida. At first, things at our new house were great. Then, a few weeks later, things started to occur. Our belongings were being moved from one place to another, for example. Next, I heard whispers and other inexplicable sounds. My family began hearing things soon after, as well as all of us starting to see shadows around the home. We were frightened. Most of the time, I would be staying home alone with my sister. During that time, I would see shadows moving, kitchen items would fall or be thrown. My sister and I would hear whispers. Then one day, there was a smell. Whatever it was disgusting, like something putrefied. We searched high and low for the origin of the odor, unable to discover the source anywhere. This continued for weeks until Dad decided to talk to the landlord. The landlord told us that the home's previous owner had been killed in the house. Since then, a lot of people who stayed there reported strange experiences, including the smell. My dad was furious. Soon after, we moved into another house. I still think about that to this day, though. I can't help myself.
If you lived in Canada, then you know that there's a lot of countryside out here, along with forests. Most of the abandoned buildings you might come across are found there. I was 16 when this happened. I grew up mostly in the rougher part of the capital. Yes, even Ottawa has its tough spots, and one is known as Vanier. While it's no Detroit, it's still where most of the poor, along with other drug addicts and homeless, live and stay. I've been through plenty of stuff that a lot of people would say is scary, but this is something that still to this day, at 21 years of age, does not sit well with me. I was with my buddies at a warehouse of sorts. It was pretty deep in the forest. We were drinking and talking when one of my friends brought up the old story of a haunted farm near that spot. He went on about how the guy who got him in brought him there to scare the crap out of him. I want to add that when they went, he did confirm that his friend was the one who was messing with him, but he still said that something was off about it, so we started making jokes. And then I made a joke that got him really serious. I think I said something along the lines of, "There's a ghost in there with Betty White making a porno." He then looks me in the eyes and tells me, "No, something is messed up in there. I don't care what, but I felt it." Me being the jerk that I am, I joked about how he was being the wuss and that the only things you really have to fear is fear itself. He then convinced me to go to this haunted barn. In retrospect, I should have just shut up right there and then. Next thing I know, we're heading to the barn. We get there, and it's me, my friend, plus this guy that I don't really know, but he was with the group. We walk in, the three of us. Me and the other guy start loudmouthing, right? Wild stuff like, "Hey Casper, what's poppin'?" and "First spirit that comes out gets bopped on sight." I'm not joking when I say that we get halfway in when these heavy doors shut on us. Those big barn doors, the old ones that took some effort getting them open in the first place, let alone having them swing closed like that. We go to push them open only to find out that they were stuck. So we immediately turn to my friend and start grilling him over trying to trip us up over some fake ghost crap, while Random that was with me starts turning on his flashlight on his phone. I'm asking where our mutual friend is, who I thought was helping him, until I noticed my friend is straight tearing up which causes me to start freaking out. And I mean freaking out. I'm banging on the door, trying to get homeboy to help, while big homie is acting like a statue. I get a weird feeling on my shoulder. I start to freeze up, and all I hear to my side is scared, as if it were some kind of taunt. I spin around, seeing the same scene as from when I had started freaking. The guy pushing on the door, my friend staring off into nothing. As I'm asking if anyone heard that, the guy pushing the door starts spazzing, saying something in Spanish, I think. I grab him, telling him to calm down, while he's giving me this look like he just got shot. I'm sitting there trying to snap him out of his funk. Then my friend starts ramming into the door over and over really hard. I thought he was going to hurt himself. It was dark. I can't tell exactly what was being thrown around, but I can tell you that a lot was going through the air. We just started hearing crashes from all sides. I even got hit with something. I still have a scar to this day on the left side of my chin and my left shoulder. Then, the screaming. It was like 3 chicks were getting cut up. It was awful. I won't lie, I'm not going to act tougher than I am. I started passing out for the first time, being the most bizarre feeling. My friend grabs me and the random guy, both of us not seeing that he did get the door open. When we got out, I threw up, while the random dude said something that I didn't catch and then just took off. My friend and I looked at each other and started walking back. The entire way he was explaining that he had no part in this. He kept swearing it up and down. I kept ranting about how that this was impossible, and that there was no lock on the door, so how was it even locked? And that caused him to freak out more. I had to go to the doctor to get stitches for whatever it was that flew into me while we were in there. When I told the doctors what happened, which I had to say what happened, but really I should have just made something up, because it could have been anything. And when I told them what did happen, they looked at me as if I were crazy upon my explanation. They actually made me go and see a shrink for a bit, due to my outlandish claims. After a while, they let me off the hook, thinking that I wasn't crazy. All I know is that I was sober that night. Last time I checked, 2 beers don't make you trip out. And random dude is refusing to tell us why he was screaming. Now, for a bit of comparison, when I was 15, I had a shotgun pointed at me and then pressed into my stomach, being threatened that they would pull the trigger. But that's simple. I'm about to get blown up, and that's gun plus angry dude equals body. But that night, I could not explain, nor could I control, or fight back. That night fills me with a terror that has changed my life. And I see how rooms and dark places that I didn't know what was happening or how to react to or defend are the reasons to this day that this was one of the most horrifying experiences I have ever had. Don't get me wrong, getting a gun pointed at me got me on the path where I'm trying to change my life. But I can't change not being able to walk in the dark around my house and my refusal to be in dark rooms. I'm 30 now. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I was into really weird stuff. There's a few local shops that sell unusual oddities and antiques in my town, like art made from dead animals, skulls, pickled specimens, things like that. I started pickling my own specimens around age 20, when I figured out that it wasn't that hard. I had some articulated skeletons, but stuff that I was really interested was supposedly cursed stuff. I bought things people claimed were cursed on eBay, and even drove to different states to buy things from people that they claimed were haunted. I bought 3 different diebuck boxes supposedly cursed from eBay. I bought numerous haunted dolls, whatever I could find. I had some weird taxidermy items too, like a couple 2-headed baby chickens, a 2-headed snake, stuff like that. I had a few things that I wasn't supposed to have either, but I won't get into that. Long story short, nothing weird ever happened. Not a thing. I never had one unusual, creepy experience with any of this stuff. I should start this off by saying I've never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a skeptic, because I think to use that term you have to go into something deciding that it isn't real and operate from that perspective. I'm fine with saying I have no idea what it is and I can't explain it. I won't say that I don't believe in ghosts, because I really don't know what a ghost is or what it's supposed to be. I've always been into aliens, and was really obsessed with them when I was younger, but still never fully believed in them. I just kinda liked the idea of them. I'd never seen one, or seen any real proof of one, despite poring over documentary and late-night History Channel binges. So, on the subject of all things paranormal, you could say that I'm a fox molder and that I want to believe, but never really did. Anyway, needless to say, after the following series of events, my mind is quite a bit more open. Though I won't pretend that I can tell you exactly what was going on. So I'm around 21 years old and I'm working at Walmart at the time. We had these steps that we would smoke on that were outside the tire shop that would lead up to another parking lot for a different building. I went out to smoke one day and was by myself and sat at the top of the stairs. As I was smoking, I noticed a paper bag sitting kind of underneath the bushes that were there. I don't know why, but I looked in it. I was expecting to find some empty beer bottles or something, but inside of the bag was a porcelain lamb. It wasn't particularly creepy looking, to be honest. It didn't have bleeding eyes or whatever. It just looked like something that would be on your grandma's shelf. There was a red ribbon around its neck, and it looked really new. When I picked it up, there was a note underneath it in the bag. The note said, "Take me home. I'll be a good little bitch, I promise." I'm not even kidding, it really said that. It was written in red ink and looked like female handwriting. Really neat. It was written on a piece of torn out standard notebook paper. I know how stupid and cliché that it sounds, but that really is what it said. Of course, being me, I brought the thing inside Walmart and stashed it under a register because I was totally gonna take that home. I showed it to my friend who was working there and was kinda like, "Dude, look what I just found outside. Look at this note." And he was like, you should definitely not take that home." But of course I was gonna take it home. I lived for that kind of thing. Anyway, as soon as I set it down, I realized that it was actually a music box, because I jarred it enough, I guess, to make it start playing. I looked at the bottom of it, and it had one of those metal twist pins that you wind up and it plays a tune. I turned it, and it was the least intimidating melody ever. It wasn't creepy at all. I was actually getting legit disappointed, because if you wanted to pull a prank on someone with some scary object, this thing was doing it all wrong. I'm not sure what the melody was. I'd never heard it before, but it was in no way ominous. Fast forward to the end of the workday. I get in my car, come home, and show my then girlfriend. She was into all the same weird things that I was, so she was equally excited about this bizarre discovery. We cleared a space on our dresser for it, and from then on we just referred to it as the lamb. Things started happening immediately, like the next day. Me and my ex didn't have a great relationship, and I spent most of my time in the living room while she hung out in the bedroom. I'd work until around 11 at night, and get home and stay on my computer playing games until around 3 a.m. Then, once she was asleep, I'd go in the bedroom and go to sleep myself. This way, we didn't really have to spend that much time together, and we both quietly preferred it that way. So, the very next day, I'm sitting in the living room and I hear a rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I could see the entire kitchen from where my computer was, and I assumed that it was one of our cats messing with something, but both cats were actually on the floor staring at the kitchen just as confused as I was. The sound seemed like it was coming from the top of the fridge, and it was like it was rustling around the cereal boxes and bags of chips and such that were up there. I assumed it was a mouse because we had found one in there before and went over to the kitchen to check for it. I turned on the light, and as I walked in the kitchen, I heard the Grudge noise. I've only seen The Grudge once because it was one of the only films that ever actually scared me. I'm not easily frightened, and I generally don't care that much for horror movies, but something about the long, frog-like, gurgling croak sound of The Grudge freaked me out when I was younger. The only similar thing that scared me recently was the screaming bear in Annihilation. Anyway, I start walking toward the fridge and I'm totally hearing the Grudge noise. Just to reiterate, this is only impactful because this is literally one of the only things that I've ever been scared of, and it was coming directly from the top of the fridge where the rustling sound had been. I froze dead in place, and so did my cats. They did not want to go anywhere near that. I had no idea what to do. I was literally on the verge of passing out. So I tried to articulate this in my head, and I decided that the fridge must be broken, that a fan or something in it must be grinding. I crammed that thought into my head, and I sat back down in my chair and put on my headphones. I did leave the light on, I'll admit. Normally, I sat in total darkness. I was really trying to convince myself that the fridge was making that sound, but I was finding it incredibly hard to do so. I was also in panic mode, and I was thinking, what do movies and ghost shows and stuff say? Don't acknowledge that it exists? So I became the dad in every horror film, and I just said, the fridge is broken, and went back to playing WoW while on the verge of jumping out of my own skin and using my headphones to drown out the noise. I actually sat there for way longer than I normally even played WoW because I was genuinely terrified to either move or take my headphones off. I had this horrible thought in my head that as soon as I removed my headphones, I would hear the noise like right next to my ear and turn, and some old woman would eat my face or something. I had no idea how long it went on or when it stopped. I literally sat there until sunrise. I never went to sleep, and I used an Elvis playlist and chatting to my guildmates in WoW to distract me as best as I could. But I literally just sat there frozen in terror the entire night until the sun came up and my girlfriend woke up. She came in the living room around 8 a.m. and was pissed off at me because I never went to bed. She complained that I played games too much, even though we both knew she didn't want me around any more than I wanted to be around her. But our relationship issues aside, she was badgering me about being on the computer all night, and I just said, I don't want to talk about it. And she let it go. She softened up quite a bit, looked a little confused, but I think that she could tell I was freaked out. Then she proceeded to freak me out even further. She showed me her arm and said the cat scratched the hell out of me last night. And she did indeed have what appeared to be a cat scratch running down the length of her forearm. The problem was, she kept the bedroom door closed, and like I said, both of the cats were in the living room with me, and I hadn't moved from that chair. No one let the cat in the bedroom. In fact, when sunrise came, they were still almost in the exact same spot staring at the kitchen that they had been in when I went back to playing WoW. I didn't say anything about it. I just said, oh, dang, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Since I hadn't slept, I called into work that day, even though in reality I really just wanted to leave. So I did an unusual thing, and me and my girlfriend went bowling for the day, then to a movie, then dinner. I was clearly acting weird because we never did anything together, and I was obviously trying to avoid the house. I asked if she wanted to go night fishing, and she finally asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't tell her, though. I didn't want to talk about it. She declined my generous offer to fish in the dark, and we ended up going home. We started our nightly ritual. She retired to the bedroom to watch TV, and I stayed in the living room. The grudge noise started within an hour of me sitting down. This time, as soon as it started, I willed my completely stiff in fear body to get up and walk down the hall to the bathroom. I left my computer running and WoW open, and said I felt like watching TV. My girlfriend again remarked that I was acting weird, and I again declined to talk about it. I couldn't hear the grudge noise from the bedroom. I took some Benadryl and went to sleep when she did, which was hours before I normally went to bed. The next day I went to work, and at around 9 p.m. she called me. I was the manager of the toys department, and had a bit of leeway in using my phone, since no one really supervised me. I answered, and she was on the phone freaking out, screaming into my ear, and I could hear knocking in the background and couldn't really make out what she was saying. But finally, I made out a sentence. She was saying, "There's banging, someone's trying to get in through the walls." I left work and drove home and stayed on the phone with her the whole time, and at some point on my drive home, she left the house and started running down the street. I picked her up in her pajamas as I was driving back, and she again claimed that someone was trying to break in through the walls. She heard banging on all 4 walls of the bedroom. By this point, I was pretty certain I knew exactly what she was hearing, but I still didn't want to say anything about it. I wanted her to calm down, and I told her that it was just animals. I said that I had seen some squirrels going into a hole in the side of the wall and was afraid that we might have them in our walls. Of course, this was entirely made up, but it actually worked, and she did calm down. She didn't know squirrels could live in your walls, and I convinced her that this was the case, and I told her that I would call an exterminator in the morning and have them come out and check on everything. We went back to the house, much to my despair. My squirrel story had worked on her, but that was short-lived. The way our house was set up, we had a bathroom that was connected to our bedroom, but not by a door, just by the wall. So you had to leave our bedroom and the bathroom was the next room on the right. So the bathroom wall and our bedroom wall were the same wall. Make sense? Anyway, we got inside, she went to the bathroom and immediately started screaming again. I went in there to see what she was screaming at, and it looked like a tiger had been clawing at the bedroom wall. The one connected to our wall. The wallpaper was torn off about 6 feet high, and there were large gashes in the drywall beneath it. Reminder, this is all about 4 days into having this lamb. At this point, we got in the car and I told her about the sound I had been hearing. Her initial reaction was that we needed to get rid of the lamb, but something told me that I couldn't. She wanted to just donate it to a thrift shop or something, but I had this weird sense of unease about doing so. I felt like we couldn't just get rid of it that way. Like someone had to know what it was and want to take it from us. I can't explain why I felt that way. I just did. At this point, we did what you probably would not expect, and we actually just lived with it. Like, this went on every day. We had rules about it. The first rule was that we never talked about it in the house. We never even mentioned it. We pretended that the lamb did not even exist. It was like that episode of Family Guy where they had a giant octopus living in the house and just no one wanted to talk about it. When we had something to say about it, we would always say, "Let's go for a drive," and the other person would know what that meant. The clawing at the bathroom wall was getting deeper all the time. Eventually, there was a huge hole in the drywall, and it was starting to claw through the drywall that was connected to our bedroom. That was when I really started to freak out. For about a year, we lived with everything. We just ignored it and pretended like nothing was happening. Every night, I sat with the grudge noise. Things would fly off of shelves, doors would slam. Straight up paranormal activity, BS, every single day. One of the worst ones was one of our pickled specimens jars just exploded. It was a bird that we had had for a while, and the mason jar exploded on the mantel in the living room. Glass went everywhere, and it took hours to find it all. The bird itself also completely exploded, sending body parts splattering around the living room. It was hell. And I had a few friends that I would tell about it every day when I came into work. Like, they would ask for updates on what the lamb had been doing, and I would tell them whatever freaky story we had for the previous day. It was a daily occurrence at that point. But then, it got to a point where we couldn't ignore it anymore. My girlfriend was breaking up with bruises and scratches almost every day to the point that it had started looking like she was self-harming. She had a lot of piercings and tattoos, so she wasn't too troubled by the pain, but didn't really enjoy having to wash the blood out of the sheets every day. When it got too much was when I was sitting in the bathroom, browsing my phone, and I heard a female voice say, "Hey, come here." So I finished my business and walked into the bedroom and said, "Did you call me?" And she replied with, "I was really hoping that was you." This is about 6 months in. At this point, it started talking. Like literally speaking. It had a little girl's voice. I know again, that's so cliche and stupid sounding, but it would occasionally speak, and we would hear it. We never responded to it. Everything we'd read on the subject told us to never, ever respond. We'd hear it at our door at night, saying things like, "Can I come in, please? Please let me in." At this point, you've probably tuned this out and chalked this up as some kind of excessively long, poorly written creepypasta, but I promise you, it isn't. Her whole family knew about it as well. All my friends did. Everyone knew about this thing. When we had friends come over, they would ask us about certain things that the lamb had destroyed, like, "What's up with the bathroom wall?" And we'd just respond by shaking our heads, and they got the message. Eventually, no one came to our place anymore. They all said that it freaked them out to be there and that they were terrified just to walk inside. Even her parents stopped coming over. Her mother wouldn't even drive down our street. Still, we ignored it. As best we could, anyway. Until one night, I'm sitting on my computer, and a voice right behind me says, "Hey." I thought it was my girlfriend, so without turning around, I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And the voice responded, "Nothing." Then I realized that it wasn't her voice, and I spun around, and nothing was there. I just broke the cardinal rule, and I talked to it. I shat a brick, grabbed my girlfriend, and told her what I did while we drove around in the car. She proceeded to call me an idiot for an hour and asked what we were going to do now. Finally, I decided to Google local paranormal investigators. We contacted a local agency and sent them an email with a more condensed version of everything I've just told you. They responded in a few hours and asked me to send them a picture of the lamb. That was the first time since the day we set it down that I had ever touched it again. I put it in the middle of the kitchen table, grabbed my camera, and took some pictures of it. I sent the pics away in an email and nothing. Until this point, these people had been responding to me in a matter of hours, and now suddenly, an entire day had gone by. Then 2 days. In those 2 days, everything had escalated tenfold. The house was never quiet now. The grudge noise could be heard outside of the house, and it never stopped. Half the electronics didn't work. The TV barely worked. It would flicker on and off. The power would go on and off. The taps would start running and then close. The garbage disposal would turn on. The doors were slamming and opening non-stop. It was completely out of control, and we couldn't stay in the house anymore. Mind you, I wasn't rich. I'm living on a Walmart salary here, but we got a hotel room. I brought a laptop, and I emailed the paranormal investigators again. They replied to me this time and told me the lady who answers the emails was also their, medium or whatever, and that when I sent her the pictures, she locked herself in her house and has refused to come out for the past 2 days. They told me they were sorry, but that whatever I had was out of their league. So great, right? My house is possessed, and now it's gone apeshit because I talked to it, and the paranormal investigators don't even want to mess with it. I contemplated calling a priest or something, but I'm not religious, and I didn't know if I would have to have faith in the Lord Jesus or whatever for it to work. I contacted another paranormal investigations company in the area and sent them the same pics and basically begged them for help. This time they actually responded and were helpful, and they drove down from about 2 hours away just to talk to us. When they showed up at our house, nothing was happening. It was quiet, and everything looked normal. The doors were all closed, no sounds, nothing. Worse yet, they busted out all these gadgets, and I'm not going to pretend I knew what they did or what they were for. Some had lights, some made beeps, some buzzed, one made little lasers all over the house. They had recorders, microphone equipment, they saged everywhere, walked around waggling electronics at various locations. I don't know exactly what the hell they were doing, but I at least appreciated that they seemed to be trying. But they weren't getting anything. Nothing was happening. I even recorded bits of it on my own camera. Then all of a sudden, stuff did happen. My camera quit working out of nowhere. The battery just KO'd. All their noisy equipment started making noise, and something was over 9,000. There were 3 people, and they started talking to it like, "If you're here, give me a sign." And then they asked it to knock on stuff, and this went on for like 2 hours. Eventually, they wrapped up, and the woman who was with him said that she believed the thing who was inhabiting our lamb wasn't a spirit. She said it wasn't ever a person, and that it was something else. She said that it was pretending to be a child to try and trick us, and the fact that we weren't being tricked was angering it. They left and told me that she would call me the next day. She said she knew someone who might be willing to take it. I couldn't fathom who would want this thing, but my girlfriend and I spent the night in the hotel room again, and I did indeed get a call from the woman the next day. She said that she had spoken with someone called John Zaffis, and that he was excited and wanted the item. I didn't know who that was at the time. She told me he was the haunted collector, but that meant absolutely nothing to me. They said he had a paranormal museum. They came back to the house, got the lamb, and mailed the thing off to him. Later I realized that the dude had a TV show and is the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And that's basically it. Once this Zaffis dude had agreed to take it, everything stopped. We never had another weird incident happen again. I never fixed the bathroom wall, though. We moved out when we split up, and left it like that for the people that we sold the house to. On a side note, I recently, like in the last 6 months, watched the Conjuring movies. In a very short scene, I believe, in The Conjuring 2, there's a shot of the Warrens' daughter sleeping in her bed. On her nightstand is an identical lamb to the one that I had. When I saw it, I almost started crying in terror. I was raised in a house that had a few spirits in it. My family are all skeptics and would always find a way to explain things. A few experiences, and then I'll get to the main story. 1. Our house had 3 stories, with technically 3 master bathrooms, 1 on each floor. The one on the main floor we used as an office. I would constantly hear someone walking around in the office at night, sinks turning on, toilets flushing, and occasionally taking. My parents would always say that someone was awake and making those noises, and the toilet and water running was just faulty pipes. 2. There would always be a shadow figure that would pace on the top floor. There was a balcony that overlooked the foyer, and I would usually see who I presumed was a lady in a dress, pacing back and forth. My parents just said that it was the shadow of someone outside. We were on a hill, overlooking all of our neighbors. I don't know how they thought this was possible. 3. I hated using the upstairs bathroom, which was my bathroom. I would hear talking and singing from that bathroom. When no one was home and I was in there, someone would bang on the door. One time I was showering and listening to music. I heard the banging sound so loud that it shook the room, and then the locked door swung open, and I heard a scream. My parents said that my brother was pranking me, which is something that he never did. Anyways, on to the main event. My brother is about 10 years older than me. He was the only sibling living at home with me and my parents. He had the master bedroom in the basement. I was never really in the basement except for going to the garage because it was in the basement next to the bedroom. I always remember feeling uneasy down there, though. But I wanted a big room, so when my brother moved out, I begged my parents to let me have his room, and eventually they caved. I moved all my stuff downstairs, painted and everything. I loved it. I was talking to my brother about it one day, and he told me, "Watch out for the little girl who lives down there. She likes to laugh." I was shocked, as obviously he had to be kidding. My whole family besides me never talked about stuff like that. I just kind of giggled and shrugged it off. He was probably just trying to scare me. About a week after I moved into my new room, I had a friend come over. We were just laying on the floor next to the bathroom laughing when she had to go to the bathroom. She closed the door and I was just zoning out when all of a sudden she goes, "That's not funny." I asked her what she was talking about, as I hadn't done anything. She said that she heard someone laughing right outside the door, but I didn't do anything or hear anything. She left freaked out, and I assumed that my brother had put her up to it since she liked him. A few days later, I hear someone in my bedroom while I'm in the shower. I call out thinking it's my mom, but I don't hear a response. I get out, and as I'm putting on my robe, I hear a little girl's giggle and then, "Are you looking for me?" I freak out. I throw open the door to my room, but no one is there. I checked the garage and ended up setting off the house alarm so no one could have come or gone through the doors without everyone knowing. I run upstairs, and my mom is pissed that I set off the alarm, and I tell her what just happened. She told me my brother had a similar story when we first moved in, but that it was nothing. I called my brother and asked him why he told me to watch out for the little girl. He said that I was the little girl. He was kidding because, quote unquote, you would always come downstairs and giggle really creepy. I never did anything like that. I told him that, and he got creeped out. I still would occasionally hear the little girl. I never saw her, but she did like to laugh and open the bathroom and closet doors. I named her Sarah. My brother called me up today and asked me about this. He asked me if I was sure that I never tried to scare him by laughing, and I told him no. He got really uncomfortable. I don't think he knows how to handle the fact that our house is haunted. I was around 7 years old when this encounter happened. I was visiting my aunt and uncle's old house for dinner and a movie at their place. They reside in this town about 1 hour west of the city that I live in. It was around 10 p.m. and the sun had set. Darkness permeated the outdoors. I remember laying down on the couch watching a film, but I was half asleep. Before I intended on sleeping, I felt the urge to go urinate, so I made my way to the hallway leading to the bathroom. This is when things started to get weird. The hallway in the house has 2 doors on the left-hand side, and 2 doors on the right-hand side, followed by the bathroom door, which is straight ahead. The first door on the left was for storage, the second being my aunt and uncle's bedroom. The first door on the right led to the basement, and the second to the guest room. Before I made my way to the bathroom, I had the urge to look inside my aunt and uncle's bedroom, and I was in complete shock at what I saw. There was the silhouette of a slender figure dressed in what appeared to be an all-black dress suit, although it could have been anything, as this figure was darker than the darkness surrounding it. The thing was nearly 7 feet tall, but was not wearing a hat, and I couldn't make out any facial features. There was no way it could have been my family members, as they were all in the living room still watching the movie. As I was standing there in silence, the figure barely budged, and I just went on to do my business. As I left the bathroom, I looked back to see if this figure was there, and sure enough, it was gone. I bolted down the hallway and plowed my face into the pillows in fear. When my family asked why I ran into the couch like that, I mentioned that it was because I saw a ghost or something. They didn't think much of it at the time, thinking that kids, just have their imaginations. But I know what I saw. My friend Ava hasn't lived with her mom in over 2 years since she moved in with her boyfriend. But recently I went back to her mom's house with her to grab some plants that she had propagated and have lunch. It was a normal day and I had been in the house many times before, so it wasn't any different. The visit was short, but when they went upstairs to discuss what they should do with her old room, I was left to my own devices on the first floor. The basement didn't have a door to the downstairs and the dining room was adjacent to it. So naturally, I decided to look down the stairs since it always gave me a spook. I'm not really a huge fan of the paranormal, and I never really had a cut and dry experience. I also never quote-unquote pick up on vibes either. But I hated the vibe of her mom's place, especially the basement. When I went to the stairs, I looked down them and saw a weird, humanoid figure in the darkness staring back at me. My entire body felt fuzzy, and I couldn't move until I heard Ava and her mom coming back down the stairs, and I hightailed it away from there. Not really sure what it was, but Ava has always said that the house was haunted, and that she avoids the basement like the plague. My partner and I had just become parents, and were looking for our first home. We found an older house built around 1910-1920, which seemed perfect. It was next to a good school and close enough to family that could help out with our daughter. Everything seemed great for the next couple of years, but there was always a heavy type of atmosphere that was hard to explain. And we had this feeling like we were being watched all the time. My wife was the first to notice it, and I would always brush it off as if there was nothing to be scared of. I always carried that mindset, as I was highly skeptical of any type of paranormal activity, and I always trusted the whole "if you can't see it, then it doesn't exist" paradigm. How wrong I was, it turned out. The initial signs were that things would go missing and then suddenly turn up in the most peculiar of places, like photos, and my watch, which ended up in the bathtub. But most of the time, things seemed to find their way into the wardrobe that was in the master bedroom. Once my daughter woke us up in the night to tell me that someone had just walked out of her window. As she grew up, she would complain that the man was in her room and she couldn't sleep. I was still not believing that this could be a ghost, so I would comfort her and stay with her until she went back to sleep, and I watched a black-like shadow thing, which I can only describe as darker than the shadows around it, move from the corner of the room and out of the window. I went back downstairs and sat on the sofa, where the deepest growl I ever heard happened, which completely took me by surprise as it sounded as if it was right behind my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin and thought I needed a drink. I went to the kitchen and I could hear laughter in the living room. I couldn't think of any logical reason for it, so I went back upstairs and sat in my daughter's room again for the rest of the night. But nothing more happened. Eventually, things escalated to the point where every night around 2 a.m., you would hear walking up and down the stairs so loud that we nicknamed whatever it was Mr. Boots. When my daughter was around 10, we would get massive bangs in the middle of the night. When it first happened, I honestly thought we were being burgled. I would run down the stairs only to find nothing, not a thing out of place. I had the plumbing checked and electrical, but all was good. Then, one night, I fell asleep downstairs, and an inflatable hammer flew at the TV, instantly waking me with the noise because it had a squeaker in it. I again was trying to work out how that had happened, and whilst I was thinking about it and looking at the hammer on the floor, it started spinning really slowly. I jumped up and walked to the kitchen, and again I heard the laughter. I then heard the boots on the stairs, and my wife suddenly comes down the stairs, woken by a really bad nightmare. While we were both talking in the kitchen, we heard the laughter again. Not long after this, we couldn't take it anymore and left. But I have hundreds of weird encounters, and I can honestly say that this house turned me into a believer. I always wondered what it was that was in that house. Ghost, demon. We still talk about that place now and then. And probably always will. I work for a nonprofit that helps mentally and physically disabled people live fulfilling lives. J and C are brothers. I work for the same company as C, but at a different house. There are several houses around the city and bordering area. He works at the houses that only house children, 4 of them, I believe. His story begins on a graveyard shift which he was working with one coworker, a middle-aged woman. The house has alarms on the doors and windows which are alarmed during the night to let them know if any kids try to leave when they shouldn't. C was downstairs in the office. His coworker was upstairs cleaning. Suddenly, the alarms in the house went off, every door and window. He sprang up, assuming that the clients were planning some mass breakout, as he would later refer to it. He yelled up to his coworker to head out one door. He went out the other, frantically looking for whoever was outside. He saw one client standing beneath a tree, but apparently not in any hurry. He thought he recognized the client to be someone we'll call B. He said, "B, head back inside," or something to that effect. He continued searching for the other clients, but after running around in a panic, found no one. He gave up and headed inside to reconvene with his coworker. He said he found B, but no one else. She stunned him when she revealed that everyone was inside, never having left, including B. He said she must be mistaken. He was just outside beneath a big tree in the backyard. She had fear on her face when he insisted this. She explained how what he saw was in fact what staff of that house referred to as white dress, a ghostly woman wearing all white that seems to reside on the property and is often seen under that tree. Needless to say, he was surprised and confused, and definitely creeped out, but the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, a client from another home whom C was very close to sadly died. He was sick for a while, and C was present for his final breaths in the hospital. He was wheelchair-bound when he was alive, and later a client at the white dress home needed a wheelchair temporarily while recovering from a slip and fall accident. They brought the wheelchair that used to belong to K. Right away, B began fixating on it. When it was no longer in use, B would take it for his own enjoyment. Staff took note of this, and couldn't explain why he loved it so much. He would take it outside to a small hill, push it down the hill empty, and then return it to the top and do it again, over and over. B is nonverbal, in that he can't speak with spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates using gestures. One useful gesture has him select staff's right or left hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, I could hold out my hand and say, "B, do you want tacos for dinner?" Identify it as my left hand option. Or do you want burgers for dinner? Right hand. And then he would choose. He also had a tic, where he would hold his palm up to his face very close and sort of mumble into it. This is actually what C thought he saw when White Dress was under the tree. He thought B was there, and that he was doing that. This is important because B would often do this gesture when he played with the wheelchair. Staff got curious and thought that they might be able to determine who B was talking to and playing with in the wheelchair. They posed a sequence of this or that questions with fake names. B, who's in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily? No response. Is it James or Samuel? No response. Is it Stephanie or Teresa? Again, no response. They did this a few times before inserting the real name. Is it Kay or Jen? Right away, he selected the correct hand. Everyone present was shocked. According to C, he was the only real link between Kay and this house. B and Kay didn't know each other, and he didn't believe anyone talked of the previous owner of the wheelchair, so he can't explain how B seemingly knew Kay's name. The story still doesn't end there, however. For reasons unknown to me, C took the wheelchair home for a while. Maybe it was a keepsake. Regardless, he brought it home with him and weird things started happening around his house. C and J, like I said, are brothers. They live in a big house and rent it out with their girlfriends as well as 2 others. One day, everyone was out except for J as well as C's girlfriend. Both of them claim that the door to C's room slammed much too loudly and hard to be explained by wind, especially since no windows in his bedroom were open. This happened a few times while the wheelchair was there, which is made more interesting when you know that K would often get C's attention by slamming doors. Jay said other strange things had happened once the wheelchair arrived too, but I'm not sure what they were and don't want to confabulate the details. I do know that he claimed to once hear someone calling out his name, but no one was home except him. As I said in the opening of this post, both J and C were and still remain skeptics. They agreed that these events are all strange, but ultimately they aren't convinced. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would love for any sort of paranormal subjects in the world to be verified, but I guess I just need to see it myself to believe it. I'm married with 3 kids. The kids are older, 20, 17, and 10. We just bought a house and moved in the first week of December. Our room and my daughter's rooms are upstairs, and my 20-year-old son has a room in the basement. There's a storage room across from his room, then a big area with a fireplace where I have my gaming console, TV, and chair set up. Anyhow, on Christmas Day, the wife and kids were getting ready to go to her dad's house. I wasn't going because me and her dad didn't get along. I fire up the PlayStation in the basement and put on my headset. They're all upstairs running around because they're going to be late, and I see my son come downstairs and head into his room to grab something. A few minutes go by and I'm focusing on my game. Out of the corner of my eye, I see what I thought was my son leave his room and walk into the storage room, then slam the door hard and loud enough that I hear it through my noise-canceling headset. I pull off my headset and yell, "What the hell, man?" and look over at the storage room. The house is quiet. I walk over and open the storage room door. It's a 10 by 10 room with no windows and nothing in it. I look in his room, but he's not in there. I go upstairs, and they've already left. The van is gone. I told my wife about it, and she just laughed. Funny thing is, I never mentioned it to my son, but the other day I came home from work and he says, "Damn, Dad, I could hear you in the gaming room until like 4 a.m. I'm surprised you made it to work this morning." Me and all the girls had gone to bed by 9 p.m. the night before. So I found this old, abandoned, broken-down house in the woods close to where I live. I've only lived here about a year. I was alone walking around it, trying to see if I could have a peek inside. While I was walking around and whatnot, I felt a bit scared, but I pressed on. I found a way in, but it smelled so much of mold that I just decided not to bother. Anyway, the point of the story. When I was about to leave, I felt this sensation of sadness wash over me. I stopped and turned around and looked at an open window of the house from about 10 meters away, and I swear that there was a woman who stood there being in pain from the state of her house. I stared and was almost about to cry for a few moments as I walked away, but then I stopped and looked back again. I almost felt drawn to the house, not wanting to leave, but as soon as I got away from it and was walking back home through the forest, the feeling of sadness left. On a side note, the day before I had walked through a part of the forest where a lot of trees had been cut down and a lot of branches and bark were scattered all over the ground. There I also felt such sadness, as if the trees themselves were crying. As I'm writing this, I realize that I sound kind of insane, but I have never really felt this way before, and I feel normal like one day later, like today. This is a series of events that occurred when I lived on a plot of farmland a couple of years ago. I was pregnant with my daughter, and my boyfriend worked late at night, so I was home alone a lot. Things were okay for a while, but as time went on, it started feeling strange in the house. I always felt like I was being watched while in my bathroom and the hallway right by it. I started feeling uncomfortable around windows at night. I figured I was just scared of being there alone. One of the first strange events happened while my boyfriend and I were in bed. While watching TV, I saw the door handle to our room slowly turn as if someone were about to open the door, but then it turned back. It caught me off guard, and I was trying to get my boyfriend's attention, but it stopped when he finally looked. Things began falling off the surfaces outside where my boyfriend would go to smoke cigarettes. He told me he would feel breathing on his face while in bed. He told me several months after it started happening, thinking that it would freak me out if he told me. He's not the type to jump to it's a ghost conclusion. After I had my daughter, I was even more scared to be in the house by myself. I even began locking myself in our room every single night. One night, I was waiting for him to come home from work. It was around 3 a.m. I heard the door handle jiggle as if someone were about to come in, but then stopped. I figured my boyfriend had to use the bathroom or something. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I called him asking why he didn't come in yet, and he told me that he wasn't even home. My friend came over to hang out with me and my daughter. I was changing her while my friend was in the other room. I heard someone say, "Hello?" And I thought it was my friend, but she said she heard it too, and that it wasn't her. I would get my friend to come pick me and my daughter up frequently when my boyfriend was at work because I was so afraid. One night, I had an overwhelming feeling of danger and had them come get us. I was taking my daughter's car seat out to their car, and it literally felt like someone yanked it down and out of my hands. I didn't drop it. I don't know how to explain it other than to say just that it was yanked or jerked down. I hated being in this house. I can't even explain the feelings that I felt all the time. I was just so terrified, and I'm so happy to be out of there. We moved away 3 years ago. On moving day, my boyfriend told me there were garbage bags at the top of the stairs that were placed in a way that they weren't going to go anywhere. But as he and his brother were loading up the last bit of stuff out the front door, he saw these bags come tumbling from down the stairs. My bland storytelling does my emotions no justice. I've never been so scared just to be in my own house every night. As soon as the sun would set, the whole vibe would shift. I thought I was crazy. I was getting angry and upset far too often over nothing. I honestly dread the idea of ever going through something like that again. I was in Florida for a high school marching band trip. This was 3, maybe 4 years ago. We were marching in the Disney parade, so we got to go to all the theme parks, including Universal. One day we were in Clearwater. Myself and 3 guys who were part of my group were hanging out on the beach, far away from everyone else. Suddenly, I heard a deep voice say the word "no." It wasn't a yell, it was nothing close to a volume level that would have made me look around. It felt like a thought that I'd have in my mind, yet it was very clear and very distinct. It shook me up for a second, but I didn't want to mention it to any of the other guys. After about a minute, though, one of them asked, "Did you guys hear that?" Instantly I replied, "The no?" It turned out that everyone had heard the exact same no in the exact same distinct male voice.
Again, the nearest people were 60 feet away, and it was a mom and her kid, not a man, to begin with. We were on a beach, and it wasn't a yell, so the sound wouldn't have been able to travel that far. As a sound engineer, I can confidently say that a man, even with a deep voice, would have been unable to make a soft no loud enough to be heard from that distance. Nothing else happened. So, while it may not be the most interesting or terrifying of stories, it made me go from being a skeptic to a believer. I bought an old antique Asian chest about 15 years ago. It was really lovely. I moved in with my parents while I was in college into the guest house out back. There was no room in the tiny cottage for the chest, so my mom had me put it in the walkway between the back of the house where my young brothers slept and the living room. Everyone, and I mean everyone, hated that piece of furniture. They'd scurry past it as fast as they could to get wherever they were going. Occasionally we would hear knocking or a random door that would just open. One morning my brother Justin and I left and went to run errands and go shopping. When we came back 6 hours later, my mom was raking leaves in the front yard. When we got out of the car, Mom asked, "Wait, when did you come get Justin?" We told her that we had been gone all day. She said, "No, you haven't. I just saw him 2 hours ago. I assumed he'd gone to his bedroom to play video games." I told her that we had been gone since early that morning, and she kept insisting that there was no way. He walked past her. She had said hi to him. She said that he didn't respond to her, but she figured that he had been on a mission to get to his room. When I asked her where she saw him, she said that she was vacuuming in the hallway in front of the chest. I ended up giving it to my older brother, who said that he would hear my nieces laughing and playing in the hallway of his apartment. He said one morning he got up to see the youngest run down the hall into her room, but when he got to her room, she wasn't in there. He threw it out. I wish he hadn't, and I wish that I knew where it was now. As a kid growing up, I dealt with anger problems and would always let my emotions get the best of me, so my mom would always send me off to these residential programs. However, they weren't all that bad. If you did good, you could go on these what they called passes. It's when if you do good, you can come home for X amount of hours. So I was doing good and already had been on a few of these passes, and I got to come home for 48 hours. It was Halloween and me, my mom, my sister, and a couple of friends got together and went to this haunted house. So when we arrived, there's a line of people who are waiting to enter, and I had to take a leak really bad because I had sat in the car for hours waiting to get there. I walked to the side of the building, and there's nothing but woods literally growing next to the building, like there were tree branches leaning against and on the structure. So, as I was taking this long leak, I heard something step on a couple of sticks, and I noticed a dark shadow figure on all fours creeping up toward me. It looked kind of like a human on all fours, but this was definitely not a human. Like I said earlier, I've dealt with a lot of problems during my childhood. I didn't even have a childhood, so I was very different from a lot of people in so many ways. I didn't have a big reaction to it. I just kind of watched it and made sure that I wasn't seeing things. I tried to keep an eye on it and called my friends over to where I was to get a look. They were caught up in a conversation though and weren't paying attention, so I tried to run over to get them and get their attention and then run back to make sure this thing was still there. By the time I got them and ran over to the area, there was nothing. This thing had disappeared without a trace. I couldn't even explain to them what just happened. They didn't pay much attention to me after that. A couple of weeks went by and I just forgot about it and let it be.
My brother and I were staying out at night at our grandparents' house, and now for context, her house is in the middle of the ghetto in Golf Manor. Anyway, me and my brother were watching TV and my grandma was at the store, and then suddenly my brother says, "Want to go into the basement?" Not trying to sound like a wuss, I agreed. This was the worst decision of the month. We go into the basement, and it is creepy as hell, and when we reach the bottom of the staircase, the door shuts behind us. Now, I just shake it off as natural, but still, I feel uneasy. We go into the garage because her garage is in the basement, so we start going through. We find a rusty pipe and a motorcycle handlebar and some faint writing on the wall. We obviously find other things like a lawnmower and lawn stuff too. But then, we heard a loud bang, like the sound of a metal door slamming. It was the laundry room door. We almost crapped our pants, and we ran back upstairs, scared as hell. Later that night, we started to fall asleep. Grandma was already asleep. We heard what sounded like all the basement doors opening and slamming shut. Grandma, like I said, was not awake. We ended up finally falling asleep and told her about what happened the next morning. She just laughed and said, "That's just Jim messing with you." And then she explained that Jim was the old house owner who had died there. That didn't really help us much, but it did ease our minds. "25 years ago, we moved homes. It wasn't in the greatest of areas, but it was better than we were previously. I shared a room with one of my 4 sisters. We had a TV in our room, but the remote control was broken, so we never used it. It stayed on Channel 5, the TV Guide channel. After a few months of living there, the TV in our room would randomly turn on every night and switch to Channel 33, which was usually Seventh Heaven or Full House that would be playing. No one in my family ever watched that channel. We didn't think anything paranormal about it. The house didn't feel creepy. Everything was fine aside from the TV turning on. Eventually, the channel would change to a station with just static, and the volume would turn on all the way. It would scare us and wake us up every night, so we unplugged the TV. Ever since the station had changed to static, the vibe of the house felt different. It was heavy, and my sisters and I always felt afraid, but we didn't know why. After a year living there, we would experience weird things. Lights turning off and on, random noises, hearing kids. Our aunt lived downstairs, and she was always keeping her room locked, even when she was home. One day my sister and I went downstairs to grab the vacuum, and we heard jumping on my aunt's bed, and her door was wide open. My aunt was at work, so we poked our heads in to see who was there. We saw no one, but heard kids laughing and the bed moving, once again, as if someone were jumping up and down on it. A few days later, we were playing in the living room upstairs, and we heard a cough coming from down the hall. We went to check on who it was, because no one was home aside from my sisters and I, and we were all together. We saw a man in black pointing to my sister's room, as if he wanted us to go. We were terrified, so of course we didn't. We stayed put until my parents came home. When they arrived, we told them what happened. They went to check out my sister's room, and there were scratches and crayon marks all over the wall and ceiling. We ended up moving out of the house when my aunt was sleeping with her door locked, and in the middle of her sleep, she heard the voices of 3 different men. When she tried to open her eyes, they were held shut. They choked her and laughed. She tried to scream for help, but she couldn't make a sound. She eventually passed out, and when she woke up, she felt as though she had been beaten. Her door was still locked, and everything was still in place. We thought it was sleep paralysis, as there were no signs of anything that happened, But later on that day, and within the next few days, there were bruises all over her body and around her neck. We couldn't explain what had occurred. I was in Pennsylvania exploring an abandoned mill/factory that had been built in the 1800s at dusk. I was standing on a pile of limestone cinder blocks surrounded by tall grass and brush, with a tree line about an acre away, just after the sun had set while my friends were inside still. As I was climbing down, I heard a low, guttural growl. Not like a dog's growl, or any type of animal for that matter. It was deep. It had much more bass to it. It was very disturbing and not like anything I have ever heard before. It sounded as if it were very close, but I didn't hear any brush moving. It freaked me out, and I booked it to my friend's house in the dark. I bought 3 small clown statues several years ago from a thrift store. They came in a box of about 100 other handmade clowns, and I picked out the cutest ones. Last year I moved into a new house and put the 3 clowns in a large display case in my living room along with the other trinkets. The case is completely inaccessible to the elements and is sealed by 2 panes of sliding glass. I got a horrible wave of fear one night a few months ago, and for no apparent reason my first instinct was to check the display case. To my shock, I noticed that one of the clowns had turned 180 degrees around in the case and had positioned itself to look away from the living room. The glass had remained shut, and nothing else was out of the ordinary. I turned it back to face the right way and forgot about it until I felt the same wave of fear about a month later. Once again I checked the case, and the same clown was turned the same 180 degrees around again. This has happened about 5 times now, and I'm starting to get really worried. I can't help but believe that it's a dark spirit or energy. I'm so freaked out. It's like the clown is trying to reach me, make me notice it, or perhaps get closer to the other objects in the case. I'm afraid to destroy it, move it, or touch it at all, because I don't want to absorb any energy or curse that it might contain. "25 years ago, I moved in with my cousin along with her roommate and co-worker, Jose. The house was an old cement block, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It had a large fenced-in yard where he kept his 2 very large German Shepherds. The house was in Claremelle, Florida, in a crappy, packed, suburban neighborhood. Nothing special, rent was cheap, the house was clean. Everyone worked. We pretty much kept to ourselves. We might see each other for a few minutes here and there, but that was about it. I lived there for around 6 months. This is the story of what caused me to move out. One random night on a weekend, we all happened to be off work at the same time. We decided to invite some friends over from the pool hall that we all frequented. Jose also invited over some people who they worked with at the pharmaceutical lab. In total, there were probably 20 people at the house. We played music and did what young people do. After it had gotten late, we found ourselves discussing the subject of the paranormal. We all shared ghost stories. My cousin and I come from a pretty spooky family, so we had some good ones. Everyone was really into the topic. Jose, however, was quiet throughout most of the conversation. He waited until it died down, and then he said, "This house is haunted."
My cousin and I shot each other a look, before proceeding to laugh because, yeah, sometimes Jose's 20-pound house cat would meow at the empty hallway, but other than that, there was nothing. He then told us that there was a presence, but that it mostly stayed in the shed in the backyard. He was referring to a tiny pink wooden shed that I had never even looked inside. He told us that he always kept the curtains closed in his bedrooms because his window faces the shed, and the door to the shed would not stay closed. He had jammed it shut 1,000,000 times, but it would always pop right back open, and that creeped him out. He said he could tell when it was in the house because he would always wake up feeling depressed. Once he finished the story, he wasn't the only one who was creeped out. I didn't want to think that I lived with a presence, and I didn't like the idea that it was hurting my roommate. I was a tough chick in my own personal opinion and was like, screw that ghost, I'll shut that door, and you won't have to keep your curtains closed anymore. I said this all because in my heart, I didn't really believe that anything was in the shed or the house. I believed that we were just messing around. So I told them all that I was going outside to inspect the shed and deal with the door. Everyone followed me, and while we were walking around to the outside of the house, Jose tried to discourage me by saying that it was a bad idea. That whatever was in there wanted that door open, and that I should just leave it alone. When we got outside, it was exactly what I had expected it to be. I looked inside and there was a busted lawnmower, some old paint buckets, rusty screens, and darkness. I looked around outside and found some rusty old shovels in a corner of the garage area. I took one of them over to the shed and kicked the back door into its frame. Next, I took the handle of the shovel and put it under the handle of the shed door. I shoved that into the ground. It was without a doubt secure. We all went back inside and talked some more. It was late. I want to say 1 a.m. by the time that everyone said their goodbyes. We let the dogs into the yard and locked the gate. We made sure that the front gate was secured so that they wouldn't get out. Then we straightened up the house. Eventually, we all made it to bed. Sometime around 6 in the morning, I woke up needing to pee. I opened my bedroom door. I was very sleepy. There was a weird sound as I opened the door that startled me. It was like fingernails scraping on something coarse. I opened the door all the way, and the shovel fell through the doorway and hit me. I can't even put into words how I felt in that moment. A small piece of dirt stayed behind on the floor. The shovel had been left there, placed, standing against my bedroom door. I rushed through the house to the side door, which was locked, by the way, and then out into the backyard. The shed door was wide open. Suddenly I felt as though I couldn't breathe. I ran back into the house. Immediately I pounded on both Jose and my cousin's doors until they both woke up and emerged. I knew, absolutely knew, that none of them had been responsible for this. And based on their reactions when I told them what had happened, that suspicion was doubly confirmed. Jose literally began to weep. He begged me to tell him that I was lying, that I was just playing around for a laugh. He then begged my cousin to admit that she had done it. When neither of us would take responsibility, he went to the store and bought a bunch of religious candles, produced a rosary, and started trying to pray whatever it was away. Or pray for me for being so stupid. My Spanish wasn't even close enough to fluent to keep up with everything he was saying. My cousin, quite the opposite of Jose, was absolutely peeved. She really was ready to fight me. She was adamant that I was screwing around, pulling some kind of a prank. She called me a liar, as well as a child, and that most of all, she didn't appreciate being woken up at the crack of dawn after a night of partying, only to be made a pawn in my little scheme. On my end, though, when I knew that neither of them had put the shovel against the door or reopened it, I was filled with pure terror. There was no way that someone else had gotten into that yard. They would have had to get past the dogs just to get to the shed, and then they would have had to get inside the locked house to put that shovel against my door. I didn't sleep there again without someone in the room with me. Every moment spent there after that night was beyond tense. We all just kind of stopped talking to each other. Jose and my cousin ended up in an awful argument, and she moved out within a week. It took me another 2 weeks to find a place to live. Whenever I did, I never went back.
I used to work in a hotel as a security guard. It was built in 1922 and had a basement. One night, the front desk clerk, the valet, and I are just hanging out in the lobby just chatting when a phone rings. The phone call was coming from the basement where there are offices. At the time, there was supposed to be no one in there. I had already locked the doors and made sure that the basement was empty. The clerk picked up the phone, heard a weird noise, and then got disconnected. It chilled me to the bones. The valet guy and I went down to make sure that it was, in fact, empty and that no one had been trespassing. The doors were still locked, and I didn't see anyone coming out, so we went inside the office. The only thing that we found was the phone blinking, and it looked like someone had picked it up and dropped it. The valet and I looked at each other, and there was cold sweat on our faces. That is one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me when working as graveyard security. It's been about 8 months since this incident. I still remember it clearly. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning. My mom was in the bathroom taking a bath, so we can say that I was the only person in the house with my dog. I was feeling thirsty, so I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and my dog followed. When I turned around after drinking the water, I saw a shadow figure. It was completely opaque, pitch dark, and had a full humanoid form. It ran from the gallery in the room that was parallel to me. At that moment, my dog started barking wildly and ran into the same room. I had a pug, and we all know pugs don't usually bark that much, but at that moment, he was barking too much. I froze, wondering what to do, and when I came back to my senses, I sprinted, took my dog, and locked myself into a room. Even after locking ourselves in, my dog was still growling. When my mother came out, we checked the whole house, but we couldn't find anyone. 2 months after that incident, my dog died. Me and some friends went to an abandoned mental asylum at night, not really expecting much. We busted in through one of the boarded-up windows, and when we were inside, we all heard talking. We figured that other people were there, so we followed the sound. We were walking down the hall and heard a woman whispering, "Why did you take my baby?" over and over again. At this point, I was visibly shaking, and we all believed we found where the sound was coming from originally. We go to this room, and there was a huge cage. It looked like one of those pet carriers, only human-sized. I don't know what actually happened that night. I don't really believe that dead people were talking in there, but the sheer creepiness of it all was just too much.